Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei faced 4 god-level warriors. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The announcement declared that the day would be remembered across the underworld as a historic moment. Jigar Sitri, famed as the Winter Wyvern during the Great War, would reassume the title of Leviathan. The news spread quickly as the old war hero emerged from retirement to take back a role he had once entrusted to his eldest daughter. Many viewed his return as a beacon of hope after the chaos of nearly 5 years before, when the 3 factions had united under the DXD group to face the most twisted and dangerous adversary they had yet encountered, Rizevim Riven Lucifer. Defeating that threat and curbing several of the dark dragons under his command had been a cause for celebration, but the losses of key figures among the 3 factions continued to reverberate. Commentators observed that the leadership seat had remained empty since the deaths of the former leaders in the last war, and that Jigar Leviathan was the only being fully prepared to fill it. Names like Hyodo Issei and other DXD members were mentioned for the title because of their natural leadership and prominence among their generation, but commentators noted that they were still too young to shoulder such a position. A man of strong build, dark blue hair, and a firm, youthful face listened to the broadcast with a servant at his side, both sharing a drink to rest from what had been one of the underworld's greatest crises since the loss of the original Great Mao. As future heir of the House of Baal, he felt obligated to do his part to address the problems that had arisen in the post-war years against Rizevim. The war had cost too many lives, and the alliance between the 3 great factions was not a sufficient guarantee of stability. Aristocratic castes unaccustomed to combat eyed the situation in the underworld and heaven with distrust, and social unrest had begun to surface. Regulus, taking a drink from his mug, remarked that this turn of events must be difficult for Jigar, who was reclaiming a post he had once left to his daughter. Serorg, adjusting his collar, agreed and reflected that the loss of Serafal Sitri had been one of the most painful blows for the underworld, alongside the deaths of Surzek Gremory and Azazel of Grigory. Regulus observed that they had to remain steadfast and overcome the situation, and that Jigar, Rias, and Sona understood the weight of the moment. He noted that Rias and Sona were still carrying much of the burden. The House of Gremory and the House of Sitri, with Rias and several high-class demon retainers among the DXD group, had been forced to help rebuild the damage left from the battles 5 years earlier. It was difficult, but Sona Sitri was bearing the worst of it. With her father returning to his old title to prevent society from collapsing, she stood as the only Sitri besides him still alive and had to assume leadership of her clan as soon as possible. Regulus considered how his friend's situation contrasted with Rias, who still had her parents but now faced pressures of her own. He thought that Milikas was the best candidate to lead Clan Gremory, while Rias might soon need to take her brother Serorg's place if circumstances did not improve. Serorg acknowledged the parallel responsibility he would need to assume, but he worried about the heavy burden falling on both young women. Serorg then stood and ordered to return home. He put on his coat, settled the bill with a modest tip, and left the establishment, his pawn following at a respectful distance. They walked through the outer streets of Lilith, where resentment at the leader's response to indiscriminate attacks by the evil dragons was still evident. Graffiti on alley walls proclaimed that chaos had been unleashed, questioned how many more sacrifices would be demanded, and cursed the children of Lucifer. Both master and servant glanced aside at a group of rebellious youths scrawling such slogans and were thankful the teenagers' defiance remained mere vandalism. They had grown weary of confronting demons who came to denounce the ruins of the war. The social upheaval had begun with Rizevim's invasion of heaven and had only worsened as his forces reached the underworld. The DXD group had been credited with restoring security, but anarchy was an understandable result of the countless families and demon castes that had lost members and had resisted the new order. The unrest had roots even earlier, in the time when several demons rose in rebellion after the apparent death of the Dragon King, when human sacred gear users of the Longinus type had launched an attack on Lilith. Discontented servants and opportunistic demons had seen a chance to seize power. The presence of the Security, The hero who had helped defeat Rizevim with his companions and prevent the world's destruction, had kept the worst of the turmoil at bay. His exaltation of demon society and his devotion to the Gremry daughter were well known, though his allegiance had shifted publicly toward the Citri daughter over time. Despite the bleak outlook, both Cerorg and Regulus remained clear-headed as they left the urban core, and they sensed four presences trailing them. Cerorg adjusted his collar and continued walking. Regulus kept glancing to the side, and after a while those shadows ceased their subtle movements. Regulus then removed his jacket with a raised voice, telling the followers that they knew who he was and to stop hiding, asking what they sought. For a time there was only silence while the four presences watched from the shadows. Those presences still hid among the shadows. In a show of frustration and contempt, Cerorg threw a powerful punch at his side, the resulting shockwave disrupting a phantom's path and cracking the front of the wall. The shadows stopped their dance. Cerorg cracked his knuckles and asked the assembled figures if they would finally deign to show themselves, glancing at his pawn. The pawn nodded, preparing to take his full form if necessary. The reaction of his master was not careless. Those watching them did not appear to be ordinary enemies. A voice answered, conceding to Cerorg. One of the presences stepped forward into full form. The newcomer requested, with a hint of courtesy, that Cerorg attend to a favor. Cerorg and Regulus narrowed their eyes at the figure who had just appeared. The pursuer was very tall, over 2 meters, though slender in build. His white cloak hung under a heavy armor that contrasted with his frame. A silver breastplate bore a red sphere at its center and supported exaggerated pauldrons that curved like 2 closing jaws. Thick protection wrapped his waist and lower back, giving him a strange silhouette. What caught both demons' attention most were his blonde hair, green eyes, and the 10 white wings spread behind him. Regulus identified him as a seraph by the number of wings, a seraphim of rank, but this was the first time he had seen him. Unlike the serene expressions of Michael's court, this one wore a cold, piercing gaze, hardened beyond his youthful appearance. Cerorg stepped forward and demanded to know who he was, identifying him as a potential threat. The blonde answered that it was rude to demand a name without properly presenting oneself to the son of House Bael. Cerorg retorted that calling him that made it obvious the newcomer already knew who he was and asked to save the formalities, assuming battle. The blonde agreed to be concise. He introduced himself as Armadiamond and said it was a pleasure to meet Cerorg Bael and Regulus Nemia. He claimed to be the third arm of a group called the Weapons. Cerorg raised an eyebrow at the name. Regulus transformed into his full mode and warned that the man was more dangerous than he seemed. The leader of House Bael acknowledged the threat. The 3 figures still lurking in the shadows were likely similar. Cerorg demanded once more what they wanted. Armadiamond, with a mocking smile, answered that they were the Weapons and that they wanted Regulus Nemia handed over. He added that if Cerorg complied, he would ensure any outcome was swift and without prolonged suffering. Hostility spiked. Cerorg dashed at Armadiamond with a devastating punch, which Armadiamond intercepted with an open palm and dragged Cerorg several meters backward. Armadiamond told Cerorg to call his subordinates and use his sacred gear, warning that Cerorg could not harm him without first using his balance breaker. Armadiamond then struck with a fist as fast as the first. Cerorg raised his arm to block, taking the bulk of the impact and skidding backward across the ground. Regulus, now fully transformed into a massive lion, surged forward to attack, but Cerorg extended his arm to restrain him and called for calm, saying they needed to consider how to resolve the situation. He clamped his teeth against the sharp, cold pain in his arm and knew the injury was serious. Cerorg prepared to give everything. He could not endanger others in the area, and his retinue would surely sense his peril and move to support him. If it were only one enemy he might manage, but the 3 other shadows stepped forward as well. They positioned themselves beside the seraphim. The son of Baal swallowed hard as he realized the others were no different from their companion. Similar builds, armors, and not all were angels, making the situation far more dire. Cerorg demanded angrily what they were and what they wanted. A different member of the weapon group responded, masked and lifting an amulet shaped like a ring with a 5-pointed star opening at its center. He reiterated that they were the weapons and for now they wanted Regulus Nemia. Across the frozen landscape, the winter wyvern announced the arrival of Hyodo Issei to the castle that served as the heart of the icy realm. The palette of the surroundings was monochrome, save for the two warriors and the odd pink stalactites that had grown on the trunks of trees long dead. The winter wyvern declared it expected Issei to be ready for retribution. Issei stood defiant, clad in his armor atop his immense ice wyvern, which moved thanks to a special magical crystal. He prepared for the final fight, a first and last confrontation between a man battling to reclaim his partner and another determined to honor the memory of fallen comrades. Both men carried too much to lose, and the personal weight of this duel consumed Issei's thoughts, even in that moment when everything had led to this pivotal encounter. Sunlight filtered through the window and pulled him from his sleep. Even in the dream he had noticed a third presence, a shapeless shadow watching him with two huge blood-red eyes. The alarm then began to blare, repeating a cheerful good morning. The light slipped through the curtains and revealed a wide bed where a figure shifted, taking advantage of the space for two. Irritated by the relentless noise and its odd greeting, he sat up with a sour expression, scratched his head, and released a long yawn before silencing the alarm. He made a face as if something tasted bad and, still half asleep, glanced to his side. His girlfriend was not there. On her nightstand he found a folded card, which he opened to discover that she was sorry to have left early, asked him to have dinner ready, and had added that she loved him. He sighed and complained to himself that it had happened again, feeling drained. It did not seem very early, but the pile of assignments before his final university project was relentless, especially when combined with his life as a celebrated hero of the underworld. He resolved that he should prepare something nice for her return. After getting ready and leaving the apartment where he lived with his partner, he took out a tablet on the way to school and frowned at the underworld news headlines reporting that the House of Barbados had joined the revolt. He told himself that things were getting worse. He switched from the news to the notes in his planner, which were synced with his manager. The schedule showed classes at specific times and an interview with the media agency of the underworld. Frustrated, he mentally complained to Ravel about the difficulty of his schedule, recalling that she was not there to help and that she had previously explained in a somewhat condescending way that she could not make things easier. That was the price of being both a public hero and a student in the final semesters of a literature and linguistics degree. After finishing his last year of high school at Shinzo, Hyodo Issei had faced a tough crossroads about what he wanted to become in the future. Shortly before that turning point, he had intended to start his own company and to inherit the Gremory business. His relationship with his current partner, however, changed everything. Sona Citri remained steadfast in her dream of building a special school in the underworld where demons of every class could be educated and trained to excel socially, as they did in the raiding game. He found himself wanting to take part as well, and he directed his future professional profile toward literature, the clearest path to becoming a teacher at the school. The dream was no longer hers alone. It was striking to see how that idealism had spread to so many others, himself included. 5 years had passed since that inflection point. He had matured in many ways. His body had settled into its adult form and his facial features were more defined, though a trace of youthful freshness remained, sometimes worn by the fatigue of maintaining a double life. He was 5 years wiser, more mature, and more indulgent in his habits. Outside the skirmishes that continued in the underworld after the deaths of the Maus and the damage left by the war against Rizevim Levon Lucifer, things had been relatively peaceful. He still had duties with his clan Gremory to deal with rebellious demons, but nothing of real gravity had surfaced. After walking for several minutes, he reached the entrance to a prominent campus. A wide gate opened onto the university's central square, and across the lawns a crowd of young people went about their activities, studying in small groups, socializing, and playing guitar. He walked into a space of Western-style buildings of several stories, connected at varying heights by bridges spanning more than 8 meters, giving the place a labyrinthine yet artistic appearance. Lu Fei emerged from one of the building entrances and approached him, her blonde hair falling in soft waves. She wore a cream-colored blazer and a blue skirt, leaving behind the theatrical hat and sapphire blue cape she would not bring to Kuo University. She greeted him with a cheerful good morning. He returned the greeting amicably, scratching the back of his neck in his accustomed awkward way while she held several books to her chest. Lu Fei told him that she had finished the assignment and explained that the rose of inspiration had to be approached from an ontological perspective. She spoke with the confident, professional ease of someone fully engaged in her field, and he felt both impressed and a little out of his depth. He listened as she unraveled the complexities with the freshness of a practiced scholar, aware that there were aspects of the course that remained absurdly intricate. He reflected that their magical contract was nearly up, the one in which Lu Fei was the contractor of his services as a demon, a condition tied to his rise in social status in the underworld. Her decision to pursue the same major as him in the human world had been practical, allowing her to conduct subtle experiments alongside him. The closeness of their routine often led others to mistake them for a romantic couple rather than for partners in a complex, esoteric pact, which suited their purposes well. He admitted that he did not fully grasp every detail she discussed but understood the essentials. His grades were not the highest, but he was not failing either, and the university administration took him seriously enough. Lu Fei asked if they should go inside, and he agreed, and together they entered the campus to continue their day. The blonde smiled and asked whether he had had breakfast yet, which made Issei sigh. Issei replied that he had eaten and that he did not want trouble with the professor, so they should go inside. For his luck, although the protectors of the city no longer exerted such heavy influence, their occasional checks still granted them some advantages over the average population. One clear example was that they always ended up in the same classes, which meant the mage already knew when her companion and packed demon was lost in thought, as he was at that moment. She chose not to press him. She suspected he was thinking about the conversation they had had some time ago about taking the next step. After class they headed to a small square adjacent to one of the other faculty buildings, their usual meeting point with other classmates and friends. One of them was already there, seated calmly with a few books and wearing glasses. Issei still had not grown used to seeing such a serious look on his good friend. Saji waved them over and gestured for them to sit at his metal table, shaded by an umbrella. The wielder of Vritra greeted the mage respectfully while speaking informally with Issei. Years had passed and their manner with women had not changed, especially for the former student council member whose relationship with his two clan companions had long been public. Their situation had been exposed once when they were seen together in an awkward situation. They were fortunate it had been Tsubaki who found them in a private room rather than the university administration. Sunny could not help laughing at his friend's state. He joked that Hyodo was finished, and Issei banged his head lightly on the table in embarrassment. Issei muttered that, if he complained, Ravel and Lu Fei would make him regret it. For Saji this was not surprising. Balancing school and the demands of the demon world was a challenge few could manage, especially when one bore responsibilities in the underworld not as a criminal but as a political figure. His friend was becoming a bulwark for the underworld's morals, a role that had helped prevent rebellion and supported Jigger Citri's promotion to Leviathan. Saji took the opportunity to laugh heartily, teasing his companion about his reputation for getting into trouble. Issei's cheerful expression shifted to shy embarrassment, and he murmured that he did not think he would recover from the surprise. Saji teased him for being reckless, and Hyodo took the jab without denying it. Lu Fei cut through the mood with a light cough and reminded everyone that Issei's own reputation for impulsive behavior was not exactly quiet. Issei protested that at least he did not act inappropriately in classrooms. The exchange threatened to escalate, but the sense of rivalry was broken when another figure arrived. The most recent president of the Kuo Academy Student Council and an honorary member of the current one. Yura scolded Saji for trying to strike Hyodo on campus and grabbed the blonde's shirt collar. Saji asked, almost lazily, whether he was only allowed to do that outside university grounds. Yura released him and crossed her arms, then turned to the brown-haired student, who offered a casual wave. She did not return his greeting. Too many previous attempts had gone unanswered. The mage greeted Lu Fei politely and, having learned little of the feud between their houses, did not feel entitled to pry into the matter. Yura then asked Hyodo what plans they had for the day. Issei answered that it was the latter and leaned back against the table. He explained that a small group of rebellious demons had been causing trouble around the city, that Bucho had been occupied with underworld matters, and that Aquino had coordinated the operation so far. Tonight was the time for the incursion, he added. Hyodo, smiling lazily, replied that he would offer help if needed but did not think a band of rebels would be a problem for the hero of the underworld, and told Issei to enjoy himself. Issei responded with sarcastic laughter and a sidelong look that drew his friend's attention. The blue-haired companion, curious about his low mood, asked if Hyodo seemed unusually gloomy today. Hyodo admitted that a thought had been circling his head for some time but that he would keep it a secret for now. Saji remarked with a teasing tone that Issei's secrets usually ended up complicating things for everyone. The group all knew, of course, about Issei's secret relationship with Sona Citri, a fact that still felt like a scar to many. Saji wondered aloud if they would ever forgive him for it. Hyodo responded gravely that they would not, and the blue-haired woman brushed it off lightly. Issei buried his head against the table in defeat. The mage, both amused and nervous, murmured Issei's name, recognizing that his overwhelmed behavior meant the secret weighed heavily on him. Issei wanted this. He felt ready, and with graduation approaching he wondered if there would ever be a better moment to take the next step. Night fell in a small district at the edge of the city. The murmurs of numerous creatures blended into a near-audible cacophony. The presence of so many demons made the situation tense, a fact Issei and all his companions acknowledged as they positioned themselves to enter the fight. Yudo Kiba observed that there were 20 or more enemies. He stood in a formal outfit reminiscent of his school uniform, his hair shorter now except for the front strands, and his features more mature in his 20s. One of his sacramental demon swords rested in his hand, though the situation did not require his special weapons. Kaneko moved closer on her own assessment. She had grown taller and more mature in build, her demeanor cold as ever. She wore a long gray wool coat over black leggings that reached her knees, and her fighting style now emphasized disrupting opponents' perception and bringing them down without excessive force. Aquino, who had been coordinating the operation, took the lead. Her hair was shortened and tied in a bun at shoulder level, and she had added a wide collar to complement her priestess attire. She remained composed and refined, her role as leader entirely unchanged. Issei stepped forward and materialized his sacred gear, staring at the scene with a weary expression. He could not help but feel depressed by the circumstance. After all that had been sacrificed to end wars and secure peace, the sight of rebel groups still arising felt like a painful reminder that the conflict lingered. He thought of the sacrifices and how much had been given to achieve peace. Issei called for the team to move in, and everyone sprang into action. They had been trained since adolescence for this kind of operation, seasoned by ambushes and traps. The rebel demons' level rarely surpassed their own younger selves, so encounters like this tended to follow a familiar pattern. One of the rebels, dressed in black, charged at the red dragon with a cursed blade. The attack was fierce but appeared slow and clumsy against Issei's heightened reflexes, which caused his eyes to glow green as he anticipated and dodged. Kiba, now a master swordsman, confronted multiple foes with a single hand and applied steady pressure through precise strikes. Kaneko executed controlled martial arts moves, using them to disorient opponents until they yielded. Aquino channeled lightning with focused, elegant attacks that released her tension without cruelty, treating the confrontation as a disciplined outlet rather than a spectacle. The Gremory team Rias, Zenobia, Gasper, Rosweiss, Asia, and their allies joined the fray with full war potential. The Citri contingent was equally formidable. Between them, the rebel uprising saw swift, coordinated responses. The battle unfolded like a high-energy animated sequence, full of dazzling bursts of light and wind, dramatic maneuvers, and sweeping defensive formations rather than gore or lingering injury. In the end, the rebellion collapsed under the organized counterattack. Explosive bursts of energy cleared the area in stylized flashes that scattered the remnants of the skirmish, leaving the battlefield quiet but charged with aftereffects. The lone surviving rebel muttered a curse as he retreated, the resolve of the defenders keeping their positions steady as the night settled back into uneasy calm. The defeated rebel knelt before the 4 representatives of the Gremory group. He begged to be killed. Issei, the brown-haired leader of the group, replied that he would be the one to end it. He felt a deep reluctance toward killing, but he reminded himself that these rebels were not innocent. Their uncontrollable thirst for blood and souls had made them a long-standing threat. He said that they were only fulfilling their duty. The rebels spat bitterly about Lucifer's son and how the family had been massacred. Everyone reacted with subtle discomfort at the accusation. Old wounds and unpleasant memories surfaced. Issei declared that they had nothing to explain to a deserter and a traitor, taking charge of the situation in the calm, decisive way he had learned growing up with Sona Citri. The rebels sneered, mocking Issei as the great hero of heaven and hell and calling them the ones responsible for the current state of affairs. Kiba responded with disdain, his expression cold. Before the argument could escalate further, a pulse of green energy swept through the warehouse and ended the confrontation for the night. The blast left scorch marks across the floor of the abandoned building, but there were no graphic details of injury. When it was over, the group exchanged looks, uneasy about how much worse the rebels seemed to be getting. Rias Gremory spoke with her typical impassivity and noted that these subjects were deteriorating. Kiba sheathed his sword, adjusted his suit, and smoothed his hair into place. His practiced smile returned as he said that they had heard similar accusations before. Akino, thoughtful, added that the sentiment might be shared among residents of heaven as well. She explained that even with Michael's sacrifice, many in the heavens felt that the alliance with demons and fallen angels had been the root cause of the tragedy. Issei interrupted to steady the conversation. He reminded them that they had done what needed to be done at the time. If not for them, for Surzek and the others, everything would have been destroyed. He acknowledged that some would still blame them for now, but he believed that as long as people could continue living, they would find a way to move forward. He sighed and looked to the side with melancholy, thinking of Azazel, Michael, Surzek, and Seraphal and the sacrifice they had made to give everyone another chance. For a few solemn seconds they all shared that feeling before gradually regaining their spirit. Akino announced that she would leave for the night. She said she had promised Rias that she would help with the temple tomorrow and asked Kaneko to assist her. She said that she wanted to finish early and go home to rest. The platinum-haired girl replied respectfully and bowed, waving goodbye to both young men. Akino took her time to say goodbye gently before disappearing. Kiba told Issei that he should hurry home, mentioning that Tsubaki had been arriving exhausted lately and that President Sona was probably the same. Issei nodded. He found it curious that the school's prince and the student council's right hand were a private couple, but Kiba had confided in him because the four of them were close. Sona and Tsubaki were almost like sisters to him and Kiba. The two friends fist-bumped and parted ways, Kiba teasing in a flirtatious tone and Issei replying with a sheepish smile and a faint blush that always made Kiba laugh. Night had already fallen when Issei walked through the city toward his home. He no longer lived in the house where he had grown up. He shared a small apartment with his partner. The large Hyodo residence now functioned like a guest house, and only Rias and Asia remained there, regarded affectionately as the daughters of the older Hyodos. The rest of the group had dispersed throughout the city, meeting when needed or when they planned it. The change in living arrangements had been especially welcome for both him and Sona. It was not the house where they had shared their first important private moment. After leaving her father's mansion, Sona had lost many of the comforts she once enjoyed, including household staff. Rather than resenting the loss, she felt more independent. Her responsibilities as clan leader and the contracts she oversaw allowed her to support herself, and when Issei moved in with her they pooled resources to pay for their little place. Issei's work as a children's entertainer and the royalties from his program made his contribution possible, even with Grafia restricting how much money he could personally manage. They were building a real relationship on their own terms, and the DSPLN and effort on both sides had made things better. He found himself at the entrance of their apartment building later than intended. Sona was there, keys in hand, turning the lock. Issei breathed her name softly. The night lights framed her as she stood in the doorway, a few centimeters taller and carrying herself with a maturity that the years had brought. She had swapped the school uniform for a black vest over a purple blouse and a knee-length skirt. Her hair fell just past her shoulders with a rebellious fringe swept to the left, and her violet eyes were framed by thinner glasses than she had worn before. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, both taking in how much time and life had shaped them since the last similar moment. Sona told him he was late, keeping her hand on his arm as she glanced aside. Issei apologized, tilting his head slightly and explaining that they had been handling a situation with rebellious demons and that time had slipped away. Sona sighed and offered a warm, understanding smile, then asked if he had brought anything for dinner. He raised a bag of takeout from several restaurants and said they could choose whatever tonight suited them. He asked her to wake him if she rose first, admitting that he disliked waking up without seeing her at his side. Sona agreed and opened the door for them to enter. They settled in quickly. Often they were too tired to sit formally at the dining table and would eat in their bedroom. After some time Sona went to take a bath while Issei changed into simple black pajamas. A little later, Sona emerged from the bathroom in fresh sleepwear. Despite the fatigue and tension that still lingered on her face from the day's events, she gave him a gentle smile. Sona playfully asked what he was staring at. Issei smiled and said that after 6 years together he still could not tire of her. The passage of time and the maturity they had both gained only deepened his appreciation for her presence and character. They shared a quiet, affectionate moment before preparing to rest for the night. He was attractive, more mature but not rigid or worn, as if he were the final result of a formula that had been developing for years. After their brief conversation, she sat on the bed and released a tired sigh. Her body relaxed, and the strain of the day's work was catching up with her. The brown-haired man, Issei, asked if it had been a hard day, and he guided her gently closer as he sat on the edge of the bed and reached for a small jar of cream on his nightstand. Sona answered that it had been difficult, and she allowed herself to be tended to without complaint. She shifted to lie on her stomach so he could reach her back more easily. Sona explained that the uprisings in Lilith were getting worse, and that aggressive protests had started in other regions of the underworld. She added that Grigory was also having problems and that several castes were rebelling again. She fell silent and looked to the side, admitting that she did not know how her older sister Serafal had handled such situations. Sona suddenly broke down, calling for her older sister and crying without reserve at the news of her death. Issei held her in his arms and tried to calm her. Her outburst was raw and powerful, mirroring the grief and confusion felt across the Citri and Gremry groups when they learned of the sacrifice that Serafal and the other great demon lords, along with Michael and Azazel, had made. Sona's anguish made it clear that she had been deeply affected, slipping into a profound depression in the days after. Issei understood better than anyone how much this had cost her. Remembered how she had always been awkward when it came to Serafal, perhaps because of their clashing personalities. Socially and professionally she was impeccable, but in personal matters she struggled to express herself. Their earlier insecurities had shown how easily she could be overwhelmed by her emotions. Issei suggested that she should not pressure herself so much. He rubbed his hands together and began a comforting massage across her shoulders to help relieve the tension. The simple, attentive gesture brought a slow, grateful smile back to her face as the fatigue and anxiety eased, and she closed her eyes. She took a quieter initiative, shifting again to make it easier for him to work on her lower back and waist. Issei kept his touch steady and calm, focusing on giving her relief rather than anything else. Sona murmured that she hoped she would not disappoint Serafal, and Issei reassured her that Serafal would be proud and that, in time, Sona would learn to handle things as she would. They shared a private, supportive moment after the massage, then later rested together quietly. A few hours later, Issei sat at his cluttered desk surrounded by piles of books, photocopies, and his tablet, checking for any university notices. His mother took the opportunity to call. She expressed relief that things had gone well and said she would appreciate it if Issei visited more often and brought Sona by for dinner. Issei suggested they come this weekend. From the bed behind him, Sona slept deeply with a look of complete contentment. Issei ended the call, and his mother said she missed seeing the woman who had set him on his current path. He thought of Sona sleeping peacefully and said goodnight. A nervous twitch in his eyelid betrayed the effect of his mother's teasing, one of the few things that had not changed in years. Even though he had matured in some ways, They still reproached his awkward, embarrassing tendencies, and when they met his partner they praised him for seeming to have those tendencies under control. He chuckled quietly. His parents still seemed to think he would never settle down, and that thought was oddly one of the things stealing his sleep. A faint green glow began to appear on the back of the brown-haired man's left hand. Draig, the red dragon, made his presence known and waited for a response from his wielder, who stared off to the side in thought. For the being residing in the boosted gear, it was not difficult to discern the source of his companion's doubts. The dragon wondered aloud how many previous wielders had managed to marry in their lifetimes, and a soft, unsettling laugh echoed briefly in the background. The brown-haired man felt uneasy that the dragon in his hand reacted so strongly to a question that filled his mind. After venting, Draig's expression grew more melancholy, and he admitted that he could not offer advice on the matter. The voice recalled some who awakened its power after they were already married, and had families, and others who died before they could ask their partner for marriage. The voice told him frankly that he would likely be the first to expose the life of a human who only wanted to live on his own terms, not from one battle to another. The voice admitted curiosity about what he would do in the future. Issei replied with a defeated sigh, leaning his head back and feeling overwhelmed. He thought that it should not be so complicated. He reminded himself that they had been officially engaged when he won the chess match and when he took her away from Lord Citri's house. He asked why it had become so difficult. He still remembered Sona's words when she had revealed that truth. She wanted them to take their time to marry, that they were still young and their lives as demons would be too long to be tied down at the starting line. Yet 6 years had passed since then. Much had happened between the end of his career and other events, and he felt ready to take that step. The question remained how to do it. Lu Fei leaned toward him with one hand on her hip and the other extended toward him, telling Issei that he should remember this was one of the most important moments in a woman's life. Lu Fei advised him to arrange the setting perfectly and orchestrate everything. A perfect place, an ideal dinner. She suggested, in a breathless and excited manner, that a beach dinner where he would kneel could be fitting. Issei did not remember much more. Even from that brief suggestion he already felt the pressure, because both of them shared many memorable places. Which one should he choose? More importantly, what would he do when the moment arrived? A calm resolve settled over him as he considered his options. There were so many things that his mind became a tangled scribble when he tried to piece together every little detail required for everything to go smoothly. A late email chime broke his scattered train of thought. The message came from the university and, unusually, had been sent only to his address. He opened it and felt a surge of surprise. The situation was tense. Serord never imagined he could be brought low by his enemies in a matter of minutes, not even while the golden armor covered him and Regulus poured every ounce of power he could spare into him. He cursed as he knelt, supporting his weight with one useless, limp arm, while his 4 opponents stood calm and unbothered, their faces showing no sign of fatigue. Weapon Diamond spoke with a note of pleasure, telling him he had expected him to last longer and calling him a disappointment, then gestured towards someone in their group, a smaller figure clad in black armor. The seraphim of the group raised the amulet he carried and spoke the name of the relic, Chorus Mortis. When he did, something in the vicinity of the black-haired man reacted badly, and another of the attackers cried out in recognition, questioning whether Regulus was involved. Issei found it strange to be in the dean's office of his faculty, especially without Lu Fei at his side. Although he had visited that imposing but formal office with its integrated kitchenette before, this was the first time he had been summoned there personally. The secretary called him in and led him to a chair in front of the dean's desk. As he waited, he glanced at the many titles hanging on the wall and wondered aloud to himself if the dean's fees must be expensive. The dean soon entered, and Issei went rigid until the old man sat and made himself comfortable. The dean greeted him warmly and extended a hand, which Issei accepted politely. Issei then asked why he had been urgently requested, mentioning the email. The dean smiled to ease his tension and explained that the university's internationalization program had been producing good results, with increasing recognition and student exchanges with Europe and the Americas. He explained that Issei's grades and reputation for social aptitude made him a suitable candidate to assist with the integration of a newly arrived student. He handed Issei a folder containing the student's academic file and a photograph. The dean explained that the student's name was Zinnia Maquiel, a 19-year-old transfer from southern Italy who was close to finishing her undergraduate studies and had been selected by their partner university for the exchange program. He asked Issei to take charge of her orientation on campus, to help her get to know the university and the local culture through someone the administration trusted. The dean sighed and added that, while they would normally assign someone from the ethics office, Zinnia had an IQ above 200 and was an established genius, so her personality could be difficult to manage in an unfamiliar culture. Issei understood then that the faculty wanted him to look after the new student, and that she might be a challenging case. He agreed to help as best he could, despite feeling a flush of reluctance given everything else on his plate. He asked when Zinnia had arrived. The dean's eyes brightened as he said she had arrived about an hour earlier and offered to accompany Issei to the ethics center, where she should be finishing the last paperwork for the exchange. They both rose and walked slowly toward the office, the dean hands clasped behind his back. Issei followed closely, still puzzled as to why the university had taken such an interest in welcoming this transfer and why he, of all people, had been chosen for the task. The professor's calm, silent stride did little to dispel the doubts he harbored. Upon arriving at the ethics floor waiting office, he finally found the person he would be responsible for over the next week. The dean greeted Miss Maquiel with a good morning. Leaning against the wall with her arms crossed was a girl with dark skin and straight, coal-black hair that fell just above her shoulder blades. Her clear blue eyes framed a subtle but bright smile. She stood under 5'5" and her slender figure suggested she was nearly finished maturing physically. Today she wore a fitted black shirt with a cream scarf layered over it, thick cream shorts more suited to a traveler than the exemplary student the dean had praised, complemented by braided boots and long white socks that reached above her knees. Zinnia greeted the dean with a polite good morning, then adjusted herself respectfully and turned to the brown-haired student with a radiant smile, as if pleased. She introduced herself to him and said he must be Issei Hyodo, and that it was a pleasure to meet him. Issei felt somewhat nervous at the formality and the attention, and even more so because she was an uncommon beauty in his surroundings. He returned the sentiment and addressed her as Maquiel, though she asked him to call her Zinnia and admitted she was not good with formalities. Issei scratched the back of his neck at her directness. He wondered internally whether she truly had trouble relating to others, because her first impression suggested the opposite. Her clothing might not be typical campus wear, but her appearance and demeanor made her the sort of girl who could be popular for her beauty and ease with people. The dean smiled and said he was glad they were getting along. He placed a hand on Issei's shoulder and told him he was counting on him to be the tutor Zinnia would need. Then he turned to Zinnia and told her the university expected great things from her and hoped they could meet her expectations. Zinnia replied that she hoped the same. The dean excused himself and returned to his duties, leaving Issei and Zinnia to walk through the university corridors together. Zinnia walked with a calm, deliberate pace while Issei glanced to the side, fidgeting at the awkward silence. Issei asked what she thought of Japan so far. Zinnia looked at him with curiosity at his unusual shyness and nervousness. She listened while he explained that his arrival had been 3 days earlier, that he had organized his new living space, and that he had rented a small shop for his pastry business. Issei mentioned his pastry shop. Zinnia asked about it with genuine interest. Issei answered that he loved baking and had grown up making cakes for as long as he could remember, and he laughed softly as he said it. For a while their conversation drifted through simple topics. Rather than prying into each other's pasts, they spent the first hours sharing small details and light talk. Issei hoped that listening to her would reveal why he had been assigned as her caretaker, but there was nothing odd about his companion. She was cheerful, somewhat outgoing beyond her appearance, composed, and mature for her age. They spent a good part of the morning sitting together at a table under an umbrella. By midday Zinnia rose and stretched. She said she was bored and offered to treat him to some desserts, mentioning that her pastry stall was a 10-minute walk away if he didn't mind walking. Issei agreed gladly and said he actually wanted to stretch his legs as well. The two left the university and headed toward the commercial district. Although Issei had a modest reputation within his faculty, he did not feel the stares of classmates, and none of his acquaintances, including Saji, appeared. Zinnia announced their arrival and looked satisfied at the entrance to her shop. The banner above the door had lights and the facade conveyed a sophisticated but friendly atmosphere. She produced a key, explained that she was the only person who worked there, and opened the door to invite Issei inside. A pleasant aroma and the warm interior welcomed them as they stepped into her little bakery. The shop opened at 3 in the afternoon, right when Issei's classes ended. Inside, the bakery was as carefully arranged as its quaint facade suggested. It was relatively small, with 4 tables and 4 chairs at each, a counter filled with colorful pastries, a milkshake machine, and a door behind the counter that clearly led to the kitchen. Zinnia invited Issei to take a seat, and he obliged without hesitation. After a few minutes, a tray with brightly colored muffins and 2 chocolate milkshakes was set before him. Zinnia hoped the selection would be to his liking. Issei expressed his thanks and that she did not need to go to such trouble. The tray had been lavish, likely among the shop's pricier offerings, and the gesture made him nervous. When he tasted the pastries, the flavor was bold yet delicate, a genuine delight. Issei marveled aloud at how delicious the muffins were. Zinnia brightened and explained that the muffins were her specialty, smiling with her chin resting on the backs of her hands. Her cheerful demeanor surprised him. It did not match the image of a withdrawn, apathetic genius he had been presented. There were even ways she and Asia resembled each other. Issei wondered why someone had wanted to sell the faculty an incorrect image of Zinnia so the two of them could meet. Issei asked Zinnia seriously if she knew him from somewhere. Zinnia kept smiling, but her expression faltered for a moment. After a pause and a long sip of her milkshake, she admitted that he had discovered her. She stood and explained that, knowing he studied in the literature faculty at Kuo University, she had manipulated the exchange program paperwork to allow a private meeting. The revelation startled Issei. When he demanded to know who she was and how she knew him, Zinnia casually unfurled 2 demon wings from her back and shrugged. She pointed out that, in their world, hardly anyone did not know the hero of the underworld. She named him Hyodo Issei, the Sekyudai, the one who had fought alongside his allies and defeated the malicious Rizevim Riven Lucifer. She laughed that he must be out of his mind if he thought he was not popular. Issei reacted with shock. He had never expected someone to approach him that way. Zinnia confirmed that she was a demon as well. She folded her wings back and sat down. She went on to say that she had served in a low-ranking household in Naples, but when her lord joined a revolt in the underworld she disagreed with the uprising. She arranged the necessary documents to become independent, practically unemployed. She joked but that newfound freedom had finally allowed her to do something she had wanted for a long time. Zinnia produced a notebook and a marker from her bag and offered them to Issei with frantic enthusiasm, asking for his autograph. Issei was taken aback. Zinnia declared herself an admirer of his work, praising his rise from a low-class demon to the top of the hierarchy and explaining she had used her powers and influence to make this meeting possible now that she was free. She treated the opportunity as golden and begged for his signature. At first wary, Issei saw no hostility in her. He had suspected a trap, but she simply respected and admired him. Considering she had invited him and presented the bakery's best, he sighed and accepted, amused. He took the notebook and marker, signed for her, and handed them back. Zinnia's eyes shone with joy. Issei asked whether she had really altered an entire academic record just to meet him. Zinnia explained that she had also studied literature in Italy and simply used the internationalization program to orchestrate everything. She closed her eyes in a wide smile and settled in, barely able to contain her excitement. She felt fortunate to discover they were studying the same subject and offered him to eat as much as he wanted, insisting the house was treating him. Issei thanked her, scratching the back of his neck. Even though he was aware of his fame in the underworld, it was rare in his everyday life to meet someone who recognized him, so the attention felt pleasant. The moment changed suddenly when Issei's phone vibrated. He answered, and the voice he heard on the line was Rias. Issei responded, asking if she was all right. Their leader, irritated and confused, told her she sounded excited and urged everyone to watch what was being broadcast across the underworld. He added that Serorg was on the feed. Zinnia noticed how the brown-haired man's complexion drained and his smile twisted into utter disbelief. When he hung up the phone, Issei gave the new girl a serious look and asked whether the underworld's signal reached here. He asked it in a tone that made it sound like a matter of life or death. Zinnia replied that of course it did, took the remote from the cupboard, turned on the flat-screen television against the wall, and flipped channels quickly until she reached Lilith's feed. Sona and Rias watched the screen in disbelief, and everyone working under their command shared that disbelief. No one could say for certain what was happening, but whatever it was very bad. Rias demanded to know where the footage was coming from, and a nervous aide answered that they did not know. The aide explained that the signal had intercepted all underworld channels and could not be cut, and it appeared to be live. Rias cursed and ordered them to find a way to stop the broadcast. The situation was grave, for people who could not possibly have gathered were on screen, holding the son of the Bale household as if he were a rag. He appeared unresponsive. The matter was worse because the shortest of them was sitting on the Regulus Nemia. A tall, slender man in silver armor, with blonde hair, pale eyes, and 10 white wings behind him, addressed Hades and the known underworld. He presented the message as directed at all the so-called non-believers. A second speaker, clad in black armor with features similar to the first but bearing 10 black wings, spoke of the tragedies they had witnessed and blamed the Bstrd son of Lucifer for many of their misfortunes. He spoke of memories of the last war, of many lost loved ones beyond angels, demons, vampires, all supernatural beings, and how those losses had left them scarred by nightmares. All eyes in the underworld were fixed on the four. A woman in a blood-red dress and crimson armor, with purple hair swept to the side, honey-colored eyes, pronounced fangs, and wide bat-like wings, then accused the leaders of every faction, Rizevim among them, and even the irresponsible DXD group of setting the world ablaze through personal conflicts. She said their decisions had led to eternal consequences and social decay, arguing that a deranged individual had recklessly used powers beyond his knowledge and that the current decline of their world was the result. The final member of the group, a shorter woman in green armor whose face was completely concealed by a mask and who had 10 sizable demonic wings, declared that they were there for the underworld's inhabitants. She condemned the leaders and aristocracy for the suffering and insisted their movement did not discriminate between reincarnated beings and purebloods, calling all of them kin with a world to protect. She stepped down from the Regulus Nemia, grabbed Serorg's body with one hand, and presented his unresponsive face to the camera. Rias reacted with fury upon seeing what had been done to her cousin, unable to believe that Regulus, her most loyal servant, seemed aligned with them. She accused God of making a grave mistake in creating the sacred gears, and then turned her ire toward the abominations called Longinus. The masked woman continued, declaring that their group calling themselves the Weapons would free everyone from the threat of these weapons. She announced that they would take the Longinus from their wielders and hunt them down one by one for the sake of innocent lives. She named Serorg Bale as the first to pay for his alleged sin and warned that any faction that defended or hid these wielders would be attacked without mercy. The broadcast stunned the underworld. A revolutionary group had seized the signal to claim responsibility for killing the son of one of the most important houses and to declare war on the world. Under ordinary circumstances they might have been ignored, but the present situation was far from ordinary. Voices in Lilith reacted immediately. One citizen accused Valley Lucifer of slaying innocents for the pleasure of battle and called Longinus wielders a living threat. Others argued back, naming Hyodo Issei among those involved. The broadcast continued to inflame debate across the underworld. A resident warned that those people moved only by their own interests and that no one could forget what the heroes had done during the rebellion 6 years earlier. A heavy dispute then began in the center of Lilith. Members who called themselves Weapons watched with a certain satisfaction, having planted a seed of doubt in a society so indecisive and weak. Because of the destruction left by the war, Issei and Zinnia looked on in disbelief at what had just unfolded before them. A new war had been declared in the most repulsive way. Zinnia glanced sideways at her hero. Issei was grinding his teeth and clenching his fists in extreme anger. Zinnia called his name with concern, but he was beside himself. He respected and admired Serorg as one of the noblest men he had ever known, a hero who had risen from the mud to become one of Hell's most prominent icons. To see him treated so indignantly, betrayed by his own sacred gear and used as nothing more than a message with his body cruelly displayed, filled Issei with fury. Issei muttered in an angry whisper that those bastards had killed a close friend of his. Zinnia urged him to calm down and placed her hand on his briefly without asking. The simple, grounding gesture was enough to steady him for a moment. Zinnia warned him that now was not the time to lose control and reminded him that they had announced they would come after him, asking him to think with a clear head. Her warning made Issei think more clearly. It was true. Across the underworld they had declared him a public target of the organization known as the Weapons. If they had been powerful enough to defeat Serorg, the situation could not be taken lightly. For a moment he could not help but wonder if Vale, Valerie, Dulio, and the others were safe. Cao Cao had been missing since the end of the Great War. It was difficult to discern what was happening or what would happen next. The time of peace had ended. A new war was approaching, and this time Issei was the target. The underworld was in chaos after the appearance of that radical group. Riots quickly gained strength and sparked clashes between the populace and the demon guards, which were suppressed with overwhelming force, a result that brought no good to either those directly involved or those trying to keep power under control. Jigger Sitri was no exception. He sat on his throne stunned by the developments, but his attention focused on the supreme-class demon among the intruders. He did not need to see beneath the helm or armor to recognize who it was. The solitude of his main hall, he allowed a rare moment of weakness to show, clenching both fists in frustration and closing his eyes tightly before regaining his composure and returning his thoughts to the figure who called herself Weapon Emerald. Jigger Sitri whispered that he had not been able to keep his promise. He sat for a long time, alone in the vast hall, thinking and weighing the situation. Why was she there? What did she want? Did she not understand the sacrifices so many had made precisely to keep her from stepping onto the battlefield? Those were details of a past he could not change. What mattered now was that he would have to take the necessary measures himself. With a gesture, a magic circle appeared 2 meters in front of him, and his personal maid stepped through. Antonetta asked if he had summoned her. Jigger Sitri replied to Antonetta in a somewhat downcast tone that he would go to the human world that night. Antonetta bowed. The decision surprised her, but decades of service to Lord Sitri had taught her to keep a composed face. Antonetta asked if she should summon Lord Marmaduke to accompany him. Jigger Sitri said it would not be necessary and that he would go on his own. The maid raised her eyes in disbelief as she observed her lord's tense, contemplative expression, an expression he rarely showed. Antonetta began to ask if he was sure, but Lord Sitri cut her off and told her simply to return to her duties. The interruption made Antonetta understand that whatever was troubling him was not something he wanted anyone else to see, so she nodded and complied. It had been a long time since a threat of this scale had appeared against the 3 factions. Smaller disturbances had occurred in the aftermath of the war, remnants of anarchic sentiment among parts of the population, but these usually amounted to skirmishes that could be resolved quickly, often through negotiation. The general discontent had been kept in check thanks to the current faction leaders' understanding and restraint. Only rarely did situations tip into the worst possible outcomes. Rias Gremory sat behind the desk where her older brother had once ruled the underworld and asked what information they had gathered so far. Aquino adjusted her glasses and reported that they did not have much, only a fragment of data obtained from Lord Serorg. Aquino retrieved a control panel from the side of the desk and ordered the projector to display digital images of the members of the Weapons. Aquino explained that according to Lord Serorg's limited records, the Seraphim called himself Weapon Diamond, the fallen angel called himself Weapon Sapphire, the vampire called herself Weapon Ruby, and the demon called herself Weapon Emerald. All of them appeared to be at the pinnacle of power for their respective races. Rias noted that the weapons were the first real threat to emerge since the fall of Rizevim. It was not only their ability to defeat one of the underworld's most powerful warriors that made them dangerous, but the cohesion among their members. Outside of the old DZD group, this was the first time so many different races had united under a single objective. Kiba murmured that names based on minerals suggested that their membership might be limited. Tsubaki interrupted from the other side of the hall, stating that records from Lord Surzek indicated both their armor and names referenced creatures that had appeared before the Great War, beings over 50 meters tall that had once faced the earliest dragons. Everyone looked to Ophis, who sat expressionless on a sofa eating ice cream. Ophis confirmed that she remembered. She explained that those beings had been created by the planet to defend it from Genova, a creature that had been destroyed long ago. The infinite goddess noted that her power was enough to fracture the planet with ease. She looked at the projector with a casual gesture, pointing out that their armors resembled the originals but were not the originals, and that she did not see Ultima among them. Rias focused on the infinite goddess and asked if she had said Ultima, but the goddess remained silent, lost in an icy calm. Kaneko, uneasy at the picture, questioned whether they could assume those creatures were truly unrelated. Rias answered calmly that it was better to keep that possibility in mind. She then reminded everyone that those beings had killed Serorg with alarming ease, so the similarity with their armors might be more than mere aesthetics. Zenobia added that Regulus might be aligned with them, indicating a photo where Emerald Weapon was seated atop him, and emphasized that the newcomers had declared their objective to be the bearers of the Longinus or the Longinus themselves, so they could not rule out the possibility that those weapons might be seized and used. Saji intervened with skepticism about the possibility. He explained that sacred gears were embedded in the souls of their users. He had received parts of Vritra through their mentor Azazel, who had preserved and transplanted them through a delicate operation, so he did not believe they could be removed and used at will. Rias responded with a hard look, pointing out that it had happened before. 7 years earlier, a fallen angel named Rainier had performed a ritual to take twilight healing from Asia, and Asia's ability had been used immediately thereafter. Aquino then cut in, framing it as a confirmed fact that the newcomers could steal and use the Longinus. The mood in the chamber turned somber at that declaration. Rias stressed that this was an extremely serious threat and that they needed to alert everyone. Zenobia reported that they had already informed Dulio, and added that the declaration of war had also been broadcast in heaven. Aquino confirmed that Tobio had been alerted as well. Rias noted that Indra already held Annihilation Maker and Dimension Lost, and despite the newcomer's power she doubted anyone could wrest those. From a god like him, Lavinia had also been warned. Tsubaki listed the remaining Longinus to locate, innovate, clear, telos karma, and incinerate Anthem, and explained that there was no news on the present bearers of the first two, and that the current carrier of incinerate Anthem was unknown after Walburga had been imprisoned. A heavy silence settled over the room as everyone absorbed the precariousness of the situation. It was impossible to determine the true extent of the newcomer's power or how many Longinus might already be in their hands. Rias insisted they remain on high alert. She had already sent Gasper to stay with Valerie at all times. The last thing they could allow was for the newcomers to lay hands on the Sephiroth Grail. Tsubaki asked, worried, whether Gasper would be enough to stop them. Rias admitted he would not be sufficient alone, but his ability to halt time could buy the necessary moments for reinforcements to arrive. For now, Rias said, they had to stay together, strengthen their contacts, and devise security schemes and response protocols for the first sign of threat. She announced that some of them would be required to work with her through the night to prepare for the next appearance of the weapons. Aquino immediately volunteered to help. Tsubaki urged Rias to rest, concerned by the stress visible on the redhead's face, but Rias refused to slow down. She explained that her cousin had died and that Lord Jigger had not yet fully settled into his post. Once he reclaimed his role as Leviathan, she would permit herself some calm, but for now she would do everything she could to prevent anyone else from ending up like Serorg, who did not deserve what had happened to him. Everyone understood the weight Rias had taken on. There were demons in the administration of the recently fallen Great Maus who could temporarily assume command, but beyond the minions and servants granted by the evil peace, few of them were true combat assets. Many younger demons felt the burden of responsibility pressing on them as weapons of priority, especially after so many of the veteran combatants had perished against Rizevim. Rias admitted she did not want to be at home that day. She sighed and began outlining concrete measures with Aquino and Tsubaki, channeling her focus into preparation because in a few hours the Hyodo residence would be hosting two people she cared for deeply but could not bear to see together. Mother Hyodo greeted them with a jovial smile, the passing years having added wrinkles and strands of gray to her hair but not erasing that same warm character. She remarked that it had been some time since Issei and Sona had visited. Sona performed a pronounced curtsy out of nervousness, prompting a few amused chuckles from her mother. Issei embraced his mother and apologized for being busy with university and work. Mother Hyodo laughed softly, hand to her mouth, and told them she understood the demands of studies and employment but would be glad if they did not forget these old fools, especially Sona. The remark made Sona start slightly, and Mother Hyodo added that she would very much like to see her dear daughter more often. Mother Hyodo's expression hardened slightly, and Rias felt it even with her face turned away. The matriarch reprimanded Rias for not being very good at cooking and questioned how she expected to become a good wife if she did not master the culinary arts. Issei struggled to suppress his laughter and greeted Mother Hyodo cheerfully. Rias nodded with a faintly depressed air. It was normal for her to be unaccustomed to scolding, especially in such a maternal tone, which stood out all the more because it came from her mother-in-law. Issei promised that he would come more often to learn to cook better. At that, Mother Hyodo's stern look vanished and she smiled broadly, clearly pleased, inviting them in. The Hyodo mansion had not changed much. The ground floor had been adapted into a more useful lobby since Issei had decided to build a life apart with his partner. With fewer reasons for other group members to remain there, many had gradually moved out. Some, like Asia, Zenobia, and Rias, continued to live in the house, but with so many empty rooms the Hyodo couple had decided to treat the building like an inn, a choice that no one objected to. When they reached the first-floor dining room, the couple settled at a neatly arranged table covered with a tablecloth and an appropriately decorated vase. One of the house's residents approached and addressed Issei. A young woman in her 20s descended the stairs. Asia had blonde hair tied in a long ponytail, emerald green eyes, and wore a fitted white button-down shirt with an ochre skirt that recalled the nun's habit she had worn in darker days. Asia greeted Sona as she took a seat. Issei greeted Asia cheerfully. Sona returned the greeting with a bright expression. Asia, sitting at the table with friends, said she had not visited in a while and had been worried they were too busy, especially after what had happened to Sarorg. The atmosphere in the small dining area grew a little heavier at the mention of a familiar death. Issei acknowledged that things had been difficult but insisted they could not let pressure consume them. He said it was better to rest and be prepared. Asia responded that she had felt guilty for not visiting sooner. Asia added with a somewhat enthusiastic tone that Rias had been under too much pressure because of the incident with Sarorg and that she wished Rias would take a break. Sona explained that Rias would rest and that she had agreed to cover for her the day after tomorrow, so there was no need to worry. Both women thought it best for Rias to take a day off. Asia brightened to hear this, and Issei looked a little put out by the turn of events. The black-haired Sona let out an amused sigh at being called president. Mama Hyodo called from the kitchen for Asia to help with the table, and Asia rose quickly to oblige. Left alone at the table, Issei expressed disappointment that Sona was not taking things more slowly and accused her of piling work onto herself. Sona apologized but explained that they were facing an emergency and that such situations required drastic measures. She said she would rest properly later. Issei pressed the issue, reminding her that both of them had been very busy and that he wanted to see each other more often than just at night, not wanting them to only see each other's tired faces. Sona replied that she had offered her day off to Rias because she also wanted to spend more time together, but for now they needed to resolve the current problem. The weapons were a serious threat and Sarorg's death proved this was no ordinary danger. Issei fell silent and looked forward, cutting the conversation short. He had learned over time that when Sona decided to work on something, nothing changed her mind, and despite his frustration he understood that staying on high alert was necessary for the moment. Sona insisted that he should not involve himself full-time. She said that for now, she and Rias could handle it and he should not neglect his duties. Issei reacted with concern, questioning whether she would sacrifice her studies to help Jigger settle in. Sona acknowledged his plan to graduate and build the school he had proposed, but she reaffirmed that stopping the weapons took priority. They sat in silent confrontation for a while, each troubled by the other's stance. Issei closed his eyes and asked to drop the topic for now. Sona apologized, looking embarrassed, and explained that those enemies were after him. She confessed how devastating it would be for everyone if anything happened to him and admitted she did not know if she could bear it. Issei sighed and offered his own apology, admitting he should not have reacted so strongly. He could do nothing but support Sona. She suggested they make the most of the day at his parents' house, trying to lighten the mood. Issei agreed. Asia returned with 2 breakfasts, and the Hyodo matriarch joined them, chatting warmly with her son and daughter-in-law. She understood Issei's plans and knew how he felt for Rias. She also recognized Sona's importance in his life. The idea of her son proposing filled her with anticipation at the thought of family growing. Later, Lefei spoke to Issei over the phone and apologized. She said that as soon as she had learned about the threat from the weapons, she had contacted Valid to coordinate how they would respond if those enemies appeared. Issei told the university officials that he had persuaded them to let him be excused for the week. The brown-haired man replied that he understood, wished him luck, and hoped he would return soon. Issei thanked him and ended the call. Night had fallen. Issei lay on his bed, head propped on his hands and legs crossed, staring at the ceiling. At his side, his girlfriend slept deeply after the intense day. Mrs. Hyodo had pressed the girl to improve her cooking and to take on other household tasks expected of a devoted wife. Issei smiled quietly. It was amusing to see his usually serious and strict partner lose her composure and fumble under the pressure of her mother. It had been a pleasant day. He had not relaxed like that in a long time. Still, the current threat called the weapons required him to stay alert. The group had announced their objectives publicly, and nobody knew much about them. Lowering his guard was not an option. He had scolded his girlfriend that morning for being too carefree, and now he knew he had to return to serious training. Issei whispered that he would have to call Kiba, remembering how his old friend had once been his most reliable training partner and how necessary it was to resume that discipline. For Sona, the Citri Queen, the workplace was far from pleasant. Daily tasks had become more complex and carried weight far beyond her experience. The paperwork she handled no longer described trivial misbehavior. It documented how many of her kind were spiraling toward ruin because of the ongoing protests. Any mistake in her work could lead to suffering or worse for those affected, and the responsibility wore on her. Tsubaki asked Sona to pass the reports on material damage caused by the appearance of the weapons while Sona sipped chamomile tea and reviewed other documents. Tsubaki spoke quietly but with the same pressure Sona felt. Tsubaki noted that Sona was beginning to repeat the same error that had led to her sister's downfall in the past, obsessing over responsibility and neglecting other aspects of life. Tsubaki reminded Sona that, despite the crisis, their role was more of support to the current administration than a replacement for other governmental departments, and that extreme single-mindedness might not be necessary. Sona explained that she had read Rias's report and that, for now, she wanted to assess the state of relations with other races after the weapon's appearance. She told Tsubaki that in Paradise they were demanding explanations about why members of the weapons included demons when the group's leader appeared to be one of them, and that in Romania officials were keeping strict silence and refusing to provide information. Sona sighed and warned that if they did not act soon, all the work her older sister had done would be lost. Tsubaki looked at her queen with concern, understanding that Sona had been taking on extra duties to fill the void left by her sister's death. Sona had imposed the responsibility on herself since the tragedy. It was an impossible burden if she considered that her sister had lived for millennia while Sona was barely 23. Sona sat closer to Tsubaki, who reacted with a mixture of surprise and comfort at the gesture. Tsubaki asked about Sona's relationship with Issei, pointing out that Sona had been at work from before sunrise until late at night for months and wondering aloud whether that routine affected her partner. Sona rested her chin on her hands and thought for a few seconds. She said that Issei understood why she was doing this and that the situation forced her into it, but she admitted she had been too focused on the work. Tsubaki urged her to take care of the relationship, reminding her of all Issei had done in the past and how terrible it would be if she failed to give him enough time after everything they had gone through together. Sona conceded that she had been foolish and that she and Issei had argued on Sunday because she had prioritized work over their relationship. Tsubaki teased her gently, calling her foolish but acknowledging that she recognized her mistake. Then Tsubaki suggested sending Bennia as their representative to Romania. Sona considered that if Ella learned the place and its customs, she could serve as a good herald and make things easier enough for Issei to have a well-deserved break. She thought sending Bennia to speak with the vampires was not just a good idea but a splendid one. She smiled and reflected that it would save them a lot of work. Then she grew thoughtful. She realized she had been somewhat indifferent toward Issei and wanted to find a way to make it up to him, to do something nice. Tsubaki laughed softly. She thought it was better that Sona worry about being devoted to her partner than about a duty she felt guilty over. Tsubaki responded kindly as queen and asked what Sona had in mind. Sona fell silent, looking ahead, and finally admitted with a hint of frustration that she could not think of anything. She was not especially creative when it came to surprises. For years Issei had been the one to come up with celebrations while she usually limited herself to booking a few days at a spa. Tsubaki blinked at her leader's embarrassment and the idea of something different sprang to mind. She hoped it would avoid the kinds of wild stunts Rias used to pull in her youth. She meant something unexpected and heartfelt rather than any outrageous or embarrassing performance. The thought of Sona attempting anything risque made Tsubaki stifle a laugh, but she also understood that such approaches would make Sona uncomfortable and would not fit her personality. Tsubaki then said she had an idea. She called the building's reception and arranged for both of them to take the day off, announcing they would return the next morning. Sona only stared at her queen with her glasses slightly askew, a small bead of sweat on her cheek. The next day, practice began just as Issei had expected. His training partner, to his surprise, had been thinking the same way, so as soon as Kiba finished his shift and Issei completed his duties, they met at an old training area they had used since the Hyodo basement changed its purpose. It was the old warehouse where Issei had first fought as a demon. Its remote location and thick walls kept noise from carrying outside. Their sparring opened with quick, clean exchanges. Reminiscent of an anime duel, Kiba's speed and precise footwork created arcs and feints that were faster than many of Issei's moves, but Issei's enhanced reflexes allowed him to parry and redirect each attack whenever he kept his movement tight. They traded blows and techniques for hours, learning from each other as they had in the old days. A lot had happened since their last hard training session, and by the end of the day both were exhausted, sitting on the floor and catching their breath. Issei admitted that he had not felt this tired in a long time as he leaned on his arm, watching Kiba, who was kneeling with one knee on the ground and his hand resting on his sword. Kiba agreed that they had not trained properly in a while and suggested they not let peace become an excuse to slack off. Continuing these sessions would pay off in the future. Issei sighed, straightened up, dusted himself off, and offered Kiba a hand to stand. He invited Kiba to grab a drink with him, and Kiba accepted. They cleaned themselves up as well as they could and walked through the city. Kiba watched Issei from the side. Issei seemed pensive, perhaps weighed down by recent threats or matters of the heart. Kiba had heard similar concerns from Tsubaki about her king, so he suspected his friend needed someone to listen, and as a loyal comrade and Rias Gremmery's knight, Hyodo Kiba would not fail a companion who needed to vent. When Kiba announced they had arrived, his tone carried a small triumph. The building's facade surprised him. A large window with a black frame, a polished floral arrangement in an oversized planter behind it, and a white and red awning over a brick exterior gave the place a classic, slightly English patisserie look. It was not what he had expected for a spot to drown sorrows in ale, but Issei confirmed that it was indeed the place. Inside, the interior was no less colorful than the exterior. Shades of magenta and orange contrasted with exposed wooden beams, creating a cozy, classic atmosphere. Couples and friends were scattered about, and a dark-skinned young woman with straight black hair, wearing a white button-up shirt, black pants, and a red apron with the bakery's logo attended the room with calm professionalism. She acknowledged the newcomers and handed them menus, moving on to serve other guests with a friendly efficiency. When Zinnia saw the new customers, she could not help but smile broadly and offer them a table, Zinnia welcoming Issei. Kiba, the brown-haired friend, greeted Zinnia with a wave and sat at the table she indicated. Issei, the blonde, raised his hand and smiled as he took his seat. Zinnia asked for 2 coffees and then went to attend the other tables. Kiba's confused expression did not go unnoticed by Issei, and Issei asked if anything was wrong. Kiba replied that he had not known Issei liked pastry shops. Kiba then pointed out that the woman over there was Zinnia Maquiel. Issei explained that Zinnia was a university friend and the owner of the cafe, and that he had chosen this quiet place because he needed to talk about something very important to him. He did not want others to find out, so Kiba was the only one among their classmates who knew about this modest place. Beyond the obvious ease of confidence between them, Issei's invitation to a spot away from the others made it clear that the Red Dragon had something personal to discuss that concerned them both. Issei asked if the matter was about Sona, and Kiba answered yes, looking a little embarrassed. There was a brief pause as they both collected their thoughts. Kiba asked abruptly where Issei would propose to Tsubaki-san. An awkward silence followed. Issei continued to look away, and Hyodo Kiba blinked several times as if he needed to gather his thoughts. Kiba repeated his question in surprise. Issei, defeated, rested his chin on his hand and admitted that he wanted to get married. Kiba recovered his composure with a half-smile and said that it was not strange at all, that he was happy for Issei. Kiba advised that the proposal should be in an NTMT, special place where Issei and Sona had felt comfortable before, then laughed softly and conceded that a woman would probably have better suggestions for that kind of thing. Issei smiled at his friend's support. He did not need the approval, but having Kiba on his side made him feel more confident about what he planned to do. When Issei confessed that he did not know where to start and that things had become more complicated because of the people responsible for Serorg's death, Kiba became more serious and offered his sincere congratulations and best wishes. Zinnia arrived carrying a tray with 2 coffees and, beside each, a large chocolate muffin. Both boys looked at the order with puzzled expressions. Issei noted that he had only asked for 2 coffees. Zinnia simply smiled and explained that when it came to Issei, the cafe treated him. Kiba found her familiarity odd and wondered what her relationship with Issei was. Issei offered to at least pay for the coffees so she would not lose out on the sale. Zinnia declined but did not insist. She stepped away to attend to other tasks, and Kiba turned to Issei with a pointed look, asking where he knew Zinnia from. Issei sighed and took a sip of his coffee before explaining that the university had assigned him to keep an eye on the brunette because of rumors she had used mind control techniques and other methods to get close to the hero of the underworld. The situation had forced Issei to reveal that the modest pastry shop owner was demonic, and the whole story sounded more like a comedy than a threat. Kiba's reaction shifted between wanting to laugh at his friend and finding the girl's antics amusing. Kiba teased that she must be a fan of Issei's work. Zinnia sat down beside Kiba with her own coffee in hand and said that she recognized him as well. Hyodo Kiba, the master swordsman of the Gremory clan and the bearer of Gram. Issei asked whether she had been listening the whole time. Zinnia apologized, explaining that she relied on her sensitive hearing to keep track of orders, and that she could not help overhearing a bit of their conversation. Issei waved it off and said it did not matter. The cafe had emptied out. It was about 9 in the evening, the time when the owner usually began to prepare for the next day. After a few more words about the day's events and Issei's dilemma, the 3 of them left the shop together. The spring night was pleasant, the sky mostly clear, and a waning crescent moon hung among the stars. Issei announced that it was time to head home and asked Zinnia where she lived. She replied that she lived right above the cafe on the 2nd floor, mentioning casually that it was the only way she could manage to run the place after classes. The shop manager explained that she could not afford to spend all day commuting, so she had decided to live where she worked. Hyodo Kiba then suggested that they should retire for the night, and Issei Hyodo agreed. Both men turned to the manager, who leaned against the store entrance with her arms crossed and waved them off, telling them to come back soon. Her informal, straightforward manner fit the role of someone who ran a business. They walked through nearly deserted streets. Shopkeepers were locking up and escorting the last customers out, and the nearby university had closed for the night, leaving an empty, slightly abandoned feeling in the air. A distant cry for help reached their ears. Issei asked where the sound had come from, and as he focused he sensed a demonic presence nearby. They set off running toward the noise. The sounds of a struggle grew louder until they found a closed alley where restaurant trash containers were usually kept. 3 figures with distorted faces, pronounced fangs, and glowing eyes were attacking a woman in her mid-20s with long green hair. She wore formal clothing and looked terrified and vulnerable. Issei reacted first, driving a punch into one attacker. Kiba drew his sword and delivered a precise, decisive strike that incapacitated another. Working together with swift, practiced movements, the two overwhelmed the assailants in a stylized, non-graphic display of power. The attackers collapsed and dissolved into ash that the night breeze scattered. After the brief fight, the woman remained on the ground, trembling. Kiba extended a gentle hand and asked her to calm down and assured her that it was over. Hesitant at first, she accepted his help and rose to her feet with Kiba's support, still in shock. The woman asked who they were, frightened and embarrassed. Issei stepped forward with a composed demeanor and downplayed their identity, then asked if she was all right. She checked herself, touching her face and arms where she had been scratched, and answered that she was shaken but otherwise fine. She said she wanted to go home. Issei and Kiba exchanged a brief, private discussion out of her earshot. Issei noted that because a human had witnessed the incident they would need to handle the situation delicately. He said he would call Tsubaki for assistance. Kiba offered to accompany the woman until help arrived, but Issei hesitated because he expected Sona to return home soon and wanted to prepare for that. Kiba reminded him that attending to such small details helped keep relationships steady, and Issei agreed. Issei asked Kiba to escort the woman home, adding that Kiba should pass along his greetings to Sona. Reluctantly, Issei left the scene. Kiba turned back to the woman, who was growing faint from shock and exhaustion. He caught her before she fell and held her gently in his arms. She opened her eyes weakly and pleaded to be taken home. Kiba carried her through the quiet streets, following the brief directions she managed to give. The woman's directions were short but clear. They took the green-haired girl to a modest hotel in the neighborhood, where the bellhop attended to her without delay. It would have ended there if, once inside, the girl had not lost consciousness while clinging tightly to Kiba. With a heavy heart, Kiba carried her to his room. He entered a modest space with pale ochre wallpaper, a double bed, 2 nightstands, a private bathroom, and a piece of furniture that served as both closet and TV stand. After placing the woman on the bed, he stepped back into the hallway and took out his phone to inform his girlfriend. Kiba told his girlfriend Tsubaki that he was on his way. Tsubaki thanked him and expressed her love. Kiba returned that sentiment. Now his job was to wait at the entrance to the room. He felt relieved that the green-haired girl was unconscious but not injured. It appeared that shock had rendered her unresponsive, which spared him from having to explain what had happened. After he ended the call, the woman opened the door, sweating and looking at her rescuer with obvious fatigue. She apologized. Kiba urged her to rest in her room, playing the gentleman, and reminded her that she had been attacked and that it was normal to feel shaken. She acknowledged that and began to plead softly, her words trailing off. Accompanied me for a while, the plea hung in the air. Kiba knew he could not do much. He had to wait there until his girlfriend arrived to brainwash him, so resigned, he decided the best thing was to keep the other person company until she came. He entered the room and the hostess closed the door. Kiba introduced himself as Hyodo Kiba. With his back to her, he did not notice her expression shift from tired and defeated to a confident smile. Her sharp features became more pronounced, her gaze predatory, and a smile that revealed pointed teeth contrasted with her red lips. Camula stepped forward and introduced herself as Camula. As she removed her earrings, letting them fall, the atmosphere of the room changed instantly with a new supernatural presence. Kiba realized he was in danger only when his blue eyes met her crimson ones. Camula then revealed that she was a vampire. Issei stood at his front door grateful that the day had not been particularly harsh. He was exhausted after returning to serious training with Kiba, but no one had bothered him recently for interviews or conferences at Lilith, and university had also been reasonably light. Luck seemed to be on his side so he could focus fully on preparing for the next battle. Still, it was his partner's turn to bring the meal that evening, and he had hoped she would have taken the trouble to buy Italian food, the kind he liked most. When he stepped inside, a strong, appetizing scent of cooking filled his senses. It did not smell burnt or heavy, it was especially appealing. He wondered if Sona was cooking. Drawn by curiosity, he moved quietly through the house and found the kitchen empty, though pots were on the stove and the bubbling suggested someone had been there recently. Sona called from the bedroom asking if it was him. Issei answered that he had returned and kept admiring the food with interest and appetite. Sona emerged from the bedroom and said she had been practicing what her mother had taught her over the weekend. Issei smiled with delight at the sight of the meal and commented how good it looked. Sona stepped closer and embraced him, pressing a gentle, affectionate kiss to his face that conveyed longing and warmth. Issei was surprised but returned the embrace, and for a moment both simply held each other. Sona admitted she had been a little distant recently and worried they were becoming a nightly routine. She said she did not want their relationship to turn sour and that, despite the difficulties, she would not abandon her responsibilities and would also make time to give Issei the attention he deserved. Issei felt a flood of happiness at her words and thought again about how much he wanted to marry her. He hugged her tightly and she responded with the same tenderness. After a moment, Sona gently pushed him back and asked him not to be so intense. She adjusted her glasses and said she had something special planned for after dinner. Issei swallowed in anticipation, curious about what that surprise might be. The excitement could hardly be contained as she spoke. Seeing her partner decide on his words made his gaze regain a spark of intensity that had been missed. 2 hours later they sat together in the dining room amid dirty plates and a half-finished bottle of wine, the room dimly lit by candles burning low. Issei closed his eyes contentedly and told Sona that the meal had been the best he had eaten in a long time, thanking her. Sona scratched her cheek, embarrassed by the compliment, and told him it was nothing. Tsubaki, who had helped with the cooking before leaving after being called away, murmured that the dish could use a bit more spice, and she and Sona briefly discussed how the red wine and garlic sauce balanced the meat. Since leaving the underworld office that afternoon, Sona and Tsubaki had spent their time preparing a special dinner for Sona Citri to celebrate her relationship with Issei. Tsubaki had been called away about 20 minutes earlier, so Sona had finished the last touches on her own. Sona rose from her chair, gave Issei a quick kiss, and told him with a playful smile that she would be back in 10 minutes. She slipped into the bedroom and closed the door, leaving Issei puzzled and expectant. Issei's inner companion, the Red Dragon, teased him about the possibility of a playful role and urged him to do his part by at least clearing the table. He obliged, washing the dishes and tidying up, feeling the tension that had built between them over recent days dissolve into something lighter and hopeful. When the door opened again, Issei found himself unexpectedly breathless. Sona returned after changing into an outfit meant to surprise him. Issei reacted with a stunned, delighted expression, and Sona approached him with a confident, teasing demeanor that recalled their earlier closeness. They exchanged playful, affectionate banter as Sona slipped into a nostalgic role that reminded them both of how their relationship had begun. The moment remained tender and appropriate. The pair shared a heartfelt, NTMT kiss and a warm embrace, reaffirming how much they cared for one another. The evening continued with that gentle closeness, both of them happy and comforted by the simple joy of being together. Sona held the brown-haired boy with both arms, their lips meeting in a heated kiss. Sona teased that Issei's kissing was inexperienced as she panted to catch her breath. Issei responded by pressing closer, and Sona laughed, warning him not to get too confident. She grew lightheaded, caught up again in the familiar thrill of the game between them. Issei steadied her with a hand at her waist, but the more explicit details of what followed are removed. A neutral pause in the scene preserved the flow as they moved into a private, NTMT moment together, rekindling the fun and excitement that had marked the start of their relationship. The atmosphere in the small apartment quickly became charged. The scent of intimacy and the sound of shared breath filled the living room, and Jigger Citri arrived there as he so often did, composed, distant, and silent. If he had transported himself into the apartment by a magic circle, no one in another room would have noticed. The lobby of the modest apartment opened to the living room, So as soon as he reached that area, he immediately sensed the heated mood. As one of the oldest and longest-lived beings in the underworld, he had witnessed many things across eras. Still, seeing his daughter so passionately engaged with her boyfriend left him unsettled. He had not expected to feel regret for having appeared unannounced at his daughter's apartment that night. Issei moved with determination, taking the initiative in a loving, unreserved display that reminded both of them of their early days together. For Issei, Sona was his whole world, and his emotions blurred his thoughts. In the midst of the moment, he fancied he saw his stern future father-in-law in the lobby. He wondered why thoughts of Lord Citri had entered his mind at such a time. That was strange, disturbingly strange. Issei's companion warned him that the figure over there was not a hallucination. Issei turned to look at the lobby again and froze. His father-in-law was staring at him intently. Jigar Citri was there. Issei stopped as if someone had taken the batteries from his body. Sona, about to ask why he had halted so suddenly, saw his terrified expression directed at the lobby and turned. For her, seeing her father looking unsettled after the scene she had just shown was like having her soul ripped from her body. Sona stumbled over her words while trying to call him, barely able to form his name. Jigar's composure broke further. He reached into his coat with trembling hands, produced a pack of cigarettes, and took one out. He fumbled with a lighter, drew a deep breath, and then lost consciousness from the shock. The passage of years can be merciless when it comes to endowing rational beings with experience proportional to their lifespan. With every minute lived, something new is learned through interaction and reflection. Beings whose lives span millennia come to know nearly every pleasure and pain life can offer, often from their own bodies. To Jigar Citri, only one event from his long life had left him genuinely unprepared and off guard. When Serafal had just acquired the title of Great Demon Lord, he had not celebrated as he should have. He had not given his daughter words of encouragement or shown pride in her achievement. Driven by that lapse, he left the comfort of his throne and went to visit her residence unannounced. He had not needed to announce himself. The trail of his power would be enough for her to know he had arrived and to prepare an appropriate welcome. When he reached the central hall of Serafal's castle and found no one waiting, he felt confused and slighted. He muttered that the girl would have to answer for this disrespect later. He focused his perception to locate his daughter's power inside the building and found it a few rooms above. She was not alone. Two other presences accompanied her, one partially unfamiliar and the other sadly familiar to him. He recognized Surzek. The Citri and Gremory families had long maintained a relationship of mutual cooperation, an aristocratic friendship that benefited both clans. It was normal for members of the same generation to be close friends, but Jigar considered Surzek far too young to hold the title of Lucifer. To him, that title carried responsibilities that could cause trouble if assumed by someone like Surzek, and he believed Surzek to be a poor influence on his beloved daughter. Ascending to the room where she resided, Jigar's narrow gaze hardened into pure displeasure. The room was small and private. It was not the kind of place one expected for a casual meeting. He found himself wondering what his daughter was doing in such a private setting with Surzek. The Gremory family had a complicated history with the daughter of one of the castes that had risen against the underworld's authority. The dark-haired patriarch shoved the door open with his palm, worried that something improper was taking place. His fear was confirmed, but not in the way he had imagined. Serafal screamed when he entered the dimly lit room. The scene was awkward and compromising. His daughter in an NTMT situation with others, a close friend present, and another guest clearly distressed and restrained. The sight unsettled him deeply. Grayfia Lucifuge was there as well, and the tableau left a scar on his memory. The guest's terrified reaction when he had entered made the situation erupt further, causing convulsions until the commotion subsided. Both women reacted with shock. Grayfia stood pale, and Serafal trembled uncontrollably, betraying her embarrassment. Jigar was no saint. He had his own faults and private proclivities, and his wife had long accepted them. But one thing was what happened behind closed doors, and another was seeing such an NTMT, boundary-crossing scene involving his daughter. It was, up to that moment, the most uncomfortable situation the Wyvern of Winter had ever experienced. 20 minutes later, the tone in the modest apartment was tense. The three of them were seated at the dining table, each with a cup of tea prepared by the hostess. Jigger coughed into his fist and tried to regain his usual composure before explaining the reason for his visit. He admitted that his intrusion had been a mistake and that he should have assumed they were a young couple with their own private life and needs. Sona's glasses fogged with steam from her cup as she tried to hide her embarrassment. Issei looked aside, feeling the sharp gaze of his father-in-law. Jigger addressed the youth with curt formality, insisting that the proper title was Lord Sitri rather than the familiar appellation the young man used. The remark carried clear disapproval and coldness toward Issei. Issei responded with a nervous twitch in his eyelid and asked, with measured politeness, that next time they be given notice of a visit to avoid situations like the one they had just endured. Jigger answered that this would be the case and hinted that the incident itself should serve as an adequate lesson. Sona wished the floor would swallow her, pressing a hand to her forehead in mortification. Issei was equally upset. He argued that regardless of Jigger's rank as a former demon king and father of Sona, the apartment was their home and Jigger had no right to enter without permission. He could not understand how Jigger could feel offended after having violated their privacy so abruptly. Jigger steered the conversation away from the embarrassment and toward a more serious matter. He said that he had come because of recent incidents involving the group known as the Weapons. He explained that certain traits and characteristics exhibited by them were familiar to him, and because this crisis was a priority in the underworld, he intended to investigate in the human world personally and would not stop until he had apprehended those responsible. Sona blinked several times, surprised by her father's declaration. It was not only that he planned to operate in the human realm with information only he seemed to possess, but what that meant for responsibilities back home. She asked what would happen to his duties as Leviathan. Jigger informed her that she would take on those duties. He told them that, given the priority of this matter to both the underworld and himself, and given how well she had covered for her sister's responsibilities up to that point, he could entrust the role to her without concern. Sona and Issei reacted with wide eyes at the sudden weight of that assignment. Issei, speaking with his most serious expression, challenged Jigger respectfully. He asked how Jigger could seriously expect to abandon his official duties to pursue his own agenda while placing the burden on Sona, and he requested an explanation for that expectation. The black-haired man's expression did not change. He dismissed the remark, saying it did not matter to him. Issei Hyodo slammed his palms on the table, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Jigger Lord Sitri watched Issei's anger with a cold, unreadable gaze. Issei mocked him in a low voice and made it clear that Jigger would have to find another replacement. He argued that Sona had been working tirelessly and deserved a rest, and he would not allow her to overexert herself to satisfy Jigger's whims. Lord Sitri remained impassive and calmly poured more tea. He replied that Issei spoke as if his opinion mattered here, reminding him that he was speaking to his daughter, not to a guest. Issei shot back that when he first met Jigger, Jigger had treated Sona like anything but a daughter. He insisted he would not allow that to happen again and demanded that Jigger find someone else, because Sona had done too much for him already. The atmosphere in the room chilled as Lord Sitri's tone hardened and his authority pressed down. He issued an order to Issei rather than a suggestion. Issei stood and clenched his fists, challenging the command with a sharp question about whether Jigger intended to abduct Sona. He reminded Jigger that the old victory between them had not been a fluke, that he could and would rise to the challenge again if necessary. Lord Sitri rose as well and adjusted the glove that covered his frozen hand, his voice low and dismissive as he called Issei insolent. He reminded Issei that he had been tolerant for a long time and that, were it not for the dragon within Issei wresting control, he would not have survived. The warning was clear: do not be arrogant. Mechanical hum filled the air as the boosted gear appeared on Issei's left arm. He spat a curt insult and told Jigger to leave his home. At the same time, the crystal of Lord Sitri's magic core manifested in his right hand. Sitri said it was time to teach Issei manners. Sona suddenly shouted for them to stop, and both men turned toward her. She looked angry, but there was also a distant, pensive quality to her expression one Issei recognized and hated, the look she wore when she felt compelled to do something she resented. She spoke to her father in a quiet, flat tone and asked if it was truly necessary that she be the one to take the replacement role. Lord Citri answered with barely concealed pride and insistence. He declared that since Serafal's death there had been no one fit for the responsibility. He admitted Sona was not fully ready, but he trusted her dedication and the way she had carried out many of her sister's duties. For that reason, he insisted, only Sona could be entrusted with the role. Silence settled over the room. Issei stared at Sona, stunned. She had just been deciding to give herself time to rest and to care for their relationship, and now she seemed poised to abandon that for her father's command. The thought that her choice might be driven by the memory of Serafal and by Jigger's pressure weighed on him. Sona forced a quiet acceptance and told her father she would do as he asked. Issei felt both surprise and anger at her decision. Sona felt a pang of guilt for letting Issei down by agreeing, but she also understood that it was an order from her father and that he was placing his full trust in her. Faced with that trust, she could not find the will to refuse. Perhaps it was her sister's death and the realization that there were few relatives left, but somehow Sona wanted to keep a connection with her father. It was sad, but that was the reality. Still, Issei's incredulous look made her drop her gaze to the floor in embarrassment. She felt no need to explain herself. Issei, stunned and annoyed, questioned whether she was really serious. She had expected him to be sad or upset, but his expression held a deeper discontent than she had imagined. Sona answered with visible embarrassment yet remained firm in her decision, explaining that her father had leads to follow and that if taking his place while he investigated was required, she would do it willingly for him. Issei could not believe what was happening. This cold girl with whom he had shared his life, the one who had been by his side since childhood and knew him better than anyone else, seemed ready to obey the man who had treated her poorly in the past simply because he asked it of her. He lowered his voice dangerously and asked if this was because she had mentioned Lady Serafal. Sona admitted, sadly, that it was partly because of that, but insisted that it was something she had to do. Issei shook his head in silence, his disappointment weighing on him deeply. Sona swallowed and brought a hand to her elbow. He muttered contemptuously that the whole situation was ridiculous, not fully conscious that his disappointment bordered on anger and carried an absolute reproach towards Sona. He accused her of caring only about work and not about the people who loved her. Sona's eyes widened at the cruelty of that claim. She could not believe what he had said. Jigger watched in silence, understanding in part why Issei felt as he did, but without the space to show empathy because there were more important matters outside. Issei told them to do as they wished, then turned his back on the Citri household. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Sona ran after him, calling his name and asking what was wrong. Issei snapped that it was none of her business, opened the door without looking back, and told her not to wait for him that night before leaving. The door slammed, cutting off any further conversation and leaving Sona speechless with a hollow ache in her chest. It was obvious Issei would not be happy with her decision, but his look of hurt and disappointment crushed her. It was the first time he had left in the middle of the night after an argument, the first time she had seen him react so harshly because of her. Sona whispered his name again and held her fist to her chest, staring at the house entrance. Her father's steps approached and broke the silence. Jigger placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder and apologized, saying he had not expected her to take it so hard and acknowledging his responsibility. He insisted the matter was a priority and promised he would make it up to both of them once it was resolved. Sona felt his attempt at restitution and understanding as a bitter thing in her mouth. She wondered whether taking that decision for his sake had truly been worth it. She greeted her father quietly. After his explosive exit, Hyodo Issei found himself walking aimlessly through the neighborhood streets, which were empty at that late hour. He had not thought of anything beyond grabbing his jacket and leaving. After 30 minutes of putting one foot in front of the other with his hands in his pockets, accompanied only by the vapor of his breath, he still had no clear plan beyond the anger and simmering fury from what had happened at home. He felt a pang of regret. His frown was dimly lit by the streetlights and the pale moon, which the scattered clouds allowed to cast a faint glow over the city. The chill of the night matched the mood. Perhaps the cold would help him think more clearly. When his legs began to ache from the walk, he realized he had to do something to go somewhere or at least organize his thoughts, so he stopped and looked up at the sky, deep in thought, unable to believe the reality of the situation. Acting on what felt obvious would have been natural, but his mind could not process anything. During his walk his thoughts had been overwhelmed by the mixture of feelings. Sona's decision. Provoked, her choice to bury herself in a sea of obligations that would strain both her and their relationship. They were already drifting apart because of their duties. He wondered if he truly wanted to destroy the little time they had left together by letting her help her father. Issei justified his mood by telling himself that she had been right. Why had she chosen something like that? Did she not care about what could happen to them as a couple? The whirlwind of resentment eased only slightly when the cold became a true nuisance, cutting through his coat, and he realized how tired he was of walking. Before he noticed, he had covered a large part of the city in his introspection. He wondered where he should go. His thoughts calmed a little. He did not want to be at home that night. He could remain angry if he chose, but he had to admit that, after cooling off, he had reacted terribly. Realizing that, he stopped dead in his tracks, thinking more deeply. He had been very rude, and that did not escape him. He recapped the events of the evening. Sona had certainly made a decision that felt like a slap to him, but thinking it through he understood why she had done it. What he could not understand was why he had reacted so negatively, and the harsh words he had shouted at her before leaving his home in cowardice stuck with him. He remembered how, when he started his school year at Kuo Academy, during the early clashes with his current partner, he had fallen into the same mistake of being cruelly offensive. At that time it had been more understandable. They had disliked each other and conversations often turned into verbal fights. Now it was different. She was in a hard situation and needed his support, and instead he had turned his back on her. In that moment Issei felt disgusted with himself, miserable over his arrogant reaction. Everything had been said and done, at least for that night. He could only pull his jacket tighter against a particularly cold wind at his back, reminding him that staying out in this weather was not a good plan, especially with heavy gray clouds gathering overhead, likely heralding rain. He resolved that he would apologize to her tomorrow. A quick glance around showed that he was about 10 minutes on foot from a place he knew where he could spend the night, though he hoped the people there would not be exactly who he expected. After a while of walking, he found himself in front of the large building with its modest front garden and tidy decoration that he had once called home. Some things had changed over time. The most obvious was the ostentatious sign above the main door that read Hyodo Inn. Even though it was past midnight, lights on the first floor and in some upper rooms showed the place was at least partially active. When he entered and the bell above the door announced him, he could not help thinking about his loneliness as the entrance hall had been converted into the inn's lobby. The days when the Gremory clan gathered there felt distant until the sound of hurried steps on the stairs reminded him he had been standing alone for a while. Rias appeared on the stairs and apologized in a voice he clearly recognized, and Issei could not help but smile when he saw her. Rias expressed hope that he had not had to wait long, then confirmed he had arrived. Issei raised his hand in greeting and moved forward to the reception area, where his hostess approached as if she could not quite believe he was there. Rias reassured him that he was not bothering anyone and, passing from surprise to modest joy, she stepped away from the reception desk to reach him and gave him a warm hug. She asked playfully what he was doing there at that hour. Issei forced himself not to mention the troubles that troubled him and answered that it was nothing special and that he would tell her later. He then took a seat in the living area and asked if there were rooms available. Rias confirmed there were and, heading to the small refrigerator behind the desk, took 2 drinks and came back to him. She said she would hand him the keys and asked what had brought him there at that hour, teasing him to tell his beloved mistress or to explain if he needed to get up early. Issei looked at Rias. She was popularly known in the underworld as the Crimson Princess and, with everything happening, was also being considered as a successor to Lucifer. Her red hair remained unchanged. She wore the standard staff uniform used by the Hyodo in attendance, suitable for the work she undertook there. For him, it was simultaneously a little amusing and wholly admirable that someone like Rias, who had wealth and power and so many responsibilities, would help with the demanding task of running a 24-hour inn while managing her other duties. She had changed the least among the members of the Gremory group and even the Citri group. Rias noticed him lost in thought and, with a playful tone, asked why he was staring, noting that he seemed entranced. Issei looked at his mistress, and she lightly chided herself for overreacting. Issei apologized that he had been thinking about some things and, smiling confidently, admitted that although he would have to get up early, missing one day of classes would not hurt. It was always a pleasure for him to spend time with his mistress without obligations. The red-haired mistress, amused, scolded him playfully for taking too many liberties by saying he would skip class the next day. She sat beside her servant and, teasingly, ordered him that if he was going to be irresponsible and not study, he should at least keep her company that night because she had a shift. A few laughs escaped them both. Issei raised his bottle toward his mistress and asked if she planned to rest the next day. She replied that although things were rough for now, she deserved a break. They tapped bottles and began to drink. For Issei, it was a good moment to relax. The command from his mistress felt almost humorous, and remembering the decision he had made a little over 4 years ago, he felt it had been the best choice of his life. 2 days had passed since the promotion ceremony to high-class demon that followed the defeat of Rizevim and the sealing of Trihexa, a victory achieved at the cost of the leaders of the 3 main factions. With those losses, authority in the underworld had to be redistributed. New heroes were needed to step forward and guide the future, and as a result Hyodo Issei was promoted to high-class demon without procedural obstacles. His popularity and charisma were seen as necessary to stabilize the social crisis the underworld would face after the fierce battle. As a natural consequence of his promotion, many expected the Red Dragon to quickly form his own retinue and leave Rias Gremory's group. That had been the purpose of his rapid promotion, to become a new beacon of hope to lead others. Issei's firm refusal to abandon his current role stunned everyone present. Issei declared that he had no intention of giving up his place as a member of Rias Gremory's group. Rias and Sona were relieved that the discussion took place in the basement of the Gremory residence, with Grafia as the only high-ranking witness. Subordinates of the heirs and other members of DXD had trouble believing what they heard. Even Valet had been taken by surprise and stepped forward to face his rival. Valet asked Issei if he was sure, reminding him that they had agreed to settle their pending confrontation by competing with their respective groups. Issei let out a small, amused laugh at that, and Grafia cleared her throat to call attention to the room. Grafia, with a tone of restrained neutrality born from being the only member of Surzeka's retinue left alive by her husband's decision, said that everyone wanted to hear his reasons for refusing to form his own group. Everyone turned to Issei. He sat on the sofa with his elbows on his knees and lowered his head, smiling faintly. He explained that at first, like the president and Valet had said, he had wanted to rise quickly to have his own group and to be a central figure admired by many. That had been his goal, and his words eased some of the tension in the room. But things had changed along the way. Issei walked over to where his current mistress sat and confessed that, in the past, he had acted on his own without trusting anyone and had ended up hurting the people closest to him. He admitted that he had betrayed their trust and even put their lives in danger through his mistakes. Everyone understood he was talking about the time when his relationship with Sona had been kept secret and had deceived those around him. He remembered finally speaking honestly with the president. He paused, recalling that heartfelt conversation. Issei declared that with Rias there was something he had said and would not retract that day. He renewed his promise in that moment to become the strongest pawn for Rias Gremory's well-being and greatness, never to turn his back again and willing to give his life if necessary so she could achieve her goals and shine as the remarkable person she was. Both remembered with perfect clarity the vow made on the terrace the day before Issei's confrontation with Jigger Citri. Rias opened her eyes as Issei knelt before her, placing his right fist over his chest where his heart lay and lowering his head. Issei explained that his feelings had not changed since that night and that for as long as he could he would remain Rias Gremory's pawn, no matter how high he rose, because he had promised to fight for her greatness. Rias did not know how to react. She felt her face flush and was filled with a warm sense of comfort and joy. She quickly looked away, embarrassed, but did not lose her smile. Rias noted that Issei had already fulfilled his promise and that he was now the strongest pawn in the underworld. She told him he could be free if he wished. Issei, still kneeling, interrupted and insisted that he truly wanted to serve her for as long as possible and asked how many times he would have to repeat it. Most understood Issei's position, and a few subtle smiles appeared. The loyalty he showed lifted the mood and gave everyone a little hope despite their difficult situation. Rias then asked Sona if she agreed. Sona closed her eyes, smiled, and affirmed with confidence that she did. Sona explained that she and Issei were a couple and that she loved him, so she understood how he felt. Honestly, if there were anyone she would trust with the most important person in her life, it would be Rias. Sona winked at her best friend and added that she would not have it any other way. Everyone nodded. It seemed unlikely that dismantling the Gremory clan would be considered for now, regardless of how much time passed. Issei then asked for Rias's attention and formally requested, as her subordinate, that she lead the battle they would one day have against Vala's group. Rias narrowed her eyes, surprised by the proposal to face each other with her as queen and him as pawn. Issei replied that he had learned from Sona that 8 pawns could be as technically important as a queen in chess. There was a brief, palpable tension in the hall at the seeming displeasure of Vali at Issei's decision. That tension eased when Vali, wearing a faint smile, accepted the challenge. He said that while he would normally consider it ridiculous, since he would not be facing an ordinary pawn but the strongest pawn in history, he would treat it as a fitting challenge. Laughter and the red-haired girl's teasing snapped Issei back to the present. He found himself in the Hyodo Inn lobby, sharing a drink with his current mistress. Issei apologized for being lost in recollection. Rias chided him not to speak as if he were already an old man. They continued to converse cheerfully on the reception couch, with moments of nervousness and others where Rias laughed freely, breaking the refined composure she usually maintained. It was not surprising when the sky outside turned a deep blue, revealing that it was past midnight. Rias sighed, noting the late hour. Issei mirrored her sigh with a tired smile and remarked that it had been a long time since they had talked like that. Rias listened, a hint of nostalgia softening her expression, and then asked why he had come. Issei admitted that he had had an argument with Sona. He refused to go into details to avoid worrying Rias, and confessed that things had heated up faster than he expected. He had acted poorly, treated Sona badly, and fled the house in cowardice. He had come to breathe fresh air and think, but he called himself an idiot for how he had handled the situation. Rias listened in silence. She understood Issei's temperament better than anyone. He did not lose his temper easily, so for him to be so affected meant the argument had been severe. She chose not to press further. The pleasant conversation that night felt like a small reprieve, a moment for both to let go and simply be together as friends. Rias told him he would tell her more when he had rested, then rose with an authoritative tone and retrieved a key from the shelf behind the reception. She explained that they were both tired and that Zenobia would soon take her shift, so Rias would go to sleep. Issei, surprised by the sudden change in tone, nodded silently. He was exhausted from the fight and lack of sleep and agreed that resting was best. Rias handed him the keys to the room he had once used. He took them and went to the indicated room to sleep. Thinking about his classmates from school made him close his eyes with amusement before collapsing onto the bed, breathing into the blankets as if trying to draw out the scent of older days. It was a shame the whole room had been remodeled. He wondered if things used to be easier. The thought of his partner brought that question to mind once more, and fatigue folded him into sleep quickly. Within minutes the room was dominated by the measured sound of the brown-haired man's breathing as he lay face down without covering himself. The quiet was interrupted by the slow opening of the door and the soft footsteps of someone entering and standing beside the bed, looking with melancholy at the man who occupied it. Rias Gremory admitted to herself that she was being foolish as she sat carefully so as not to wake him. She could not rouse him with the gentle caresses she offered his exposed cheek. At that moment she felt miserable with herself. She had everything she could want from life. Yet there was one thing she could not obtain and that obsessed her daily, the heart of her pawn. She could not believe she had reached the point where she could touch him only when he was at odds with his partner and utterly exhausted. Rias longed, with bitter sadness, for him to look only at her as she continued to slide Issei's cheek as if it were the only thing of value in her life. Later found himself standing in front of Zinnia's cafe and could not understand what he was doing there at that hour. A few hours had passed since noon, and despite other desires or obligations, the first thing he had done after getting up at his parents' inn was to walk straight to the cafe without stopping. He thought he should have at least invited Rias. The closed sign at the entrance ruined his plans. If he remembered correctly, his kohai should be studying at that time, and since he had skipped class that day, the mismatch in schedules was working against him. He wondered whether he should go home. At that hour Sona probably would not be there, and with the problems caused by his troublesome father-in-law he was seeing her even less. He felt guilty and believed he needed to do something as an apology, something similar to what she had tried the night before, though he had no clear idea what that should be. Resigned, he turned to leave when a frantic shout from a distance made him spin around. Zinnia, the cafe owner, was running toward him a block and a half away, carrying a huge travel sack and a stack of thick books that made her stagger. When she reached him, she nearly tripped forward. He caught her before she fell, though some of her books tumbled free. Zinnia recognized him and asked if he was Issei-senpai. He confirmed that he was and helped her stand again while picking up the fallen books. She joked that she had started strong, and he replied teasingly that it helped that she had never charged him for the first pastry. They laughed together. Zinnia opened the cafe door despite the closed sign and placed her books on the patisserie counter, letting out a relieved sigh. She explained that she did not usually have customers at that hour and asked what had brought him there so early. Taken by surprise, Issei hesitated and admitted to Zinnia that it was a long story. He told her that he had nothing to do and had come there almost by instinct, and she smiled proudly, implying that her pastries must be very persuasive. Zinnia then said it was time for him to earn what she had invited him for. She brought out 2 sets of uniforms and announced, recalling her mother's advice, that nothing cleared the mind like hard work, so he would help her that day. Issei asked how she could simply order him to work for her, and Zinnia, with an imploring, puppy-like expression, reminded him that he would not refuse the request of a hopeful girl seeking his help. Uncomfortable with her childlike charm but remembering her warm welcome from the first day, Issei agreed and took off his jacket, resigned. He hoped at least one of the uniforms would fit. The blue-eyed girl hoped the shoes would be her size. She applauded like a child who had just received the long-awaited Christmas gift when her idol agreed to work with her for a day. Elsewhere, in a world different from that of humans, Valley Lucifer stood with his arms crossed in the middle of a wasteland, bordering the unexplored regions of the underworld. The nearest demonic settlement was more than 3,000 kilometers away, making this a hostile no-man's land of jagged rock formations and a constant storm whose lightning strikes made the ground tremble with thunder. He had spoken little with the other members of DXD recently, beyond a few communications that warned him of a current threat, elite operatives equipped with gear tied to ancient beasts who had once shaken the fate of the world. He himself had become a target, much like Serorg Bale, whose combat power had been formidable. A seraph removed his mask and smiled, his gaze carrying an overwhelming purity. He noted that Valley was known as Arma Diamante and spoke with a tone that suggested underestimating an opponent would be a grave battlefield mistake. Valley met the smile with a sweeping look toward the bearer of one of the Longinus, an armament tied to celestial dragons, and toward the companions who stood ready with him. One companion was a black-haired man clad in ornamental Chinese armor, adorned with flowing ribbons and gold trim. He held a red staff and floated on a gray cloud. Another was a blonde woman, Lu Fei Pendragon, her curls falling gracefully over her shoulder. She wore a cream formal outfit with a loose dark blue cloak embroidered in white and gold and a pointed witch's hat. Her weapon was a worn oak staff topped with a bright red gem. A blond man in a neatly tailored tuxedo carried 2 sacred swords at his waist that radiated immense holy power. A woman with short black hair wore an ornate Japanese kimono heavy with embroidery and was framed by 6 demonic wings that wrapped around her. Finally, a gray-haired girl wore a black combat suit modeled on a church archetype. Her eyes were closed and her neutral expression unsettled many foes. The seraph's contempt did not go unnoticed by the 5. Vale answered plainly that they would let their actions speak, then calmly released his divine dividing and rose into the stormy sky. His signal sent the rest of his group to fan out across the rock formations and surround the bearer of the mystic beast armor, who remained unmoved by their initial movements. From one of the highest peaks where Le Fay had taken position, magical circles formed and knitted themselves across the heavens, exchanging energy. The blond man observed the ancient divine magic with a smug smile, remarking inwardly that it was impressive to have a mage of such caliber on Vala's team. After she finished channeling, Le Fay pointed her staff and the sky's lightning was drawn into the circles, then fired as a colossal electric beam that struck the Seraphim, shattering the peak beneath him and collapsing the ground where he had stood. The group squinted, realizing the enemy was far more dangerous than he looked. Kuroka noted the danger and observed that the Seraphim had emerged from the attack seemingly unscathed, thanks to the armor he wore. Even so, the armor did not cover his head, leaving that area exposed. 3 shots echoed across the wasteland, fired by the newest member of Vala's team. The bullets were stopped by the celestial being's hand. Lint reloaded quickly and suggested a coordinated attack. Biko, leaning his staff behind his neck, made a teasing remark about why the world called Valley an idiot. Arthur interrupted the banter by drawing both of his swords, preparing for close combat, and voiced his agreement with Lint's plan. They needed to pin the enemy down and apply as much pressure as possible. The 4 members of Team Valley, excluding their leader, launched themselves at the enemy while Valley concentrated, drawing the power he needed to force his sacred gear to its maximum. One person later requested 3 cappuccinos. Another replied that theirs was the Irish cappuccino and that they loved the Irish cappuccino. A customer asked if they could have theirs with amaretto. The red dragon, Hyodo Issei, arched an eyebrow and asked what that was while jotting down everything he could in a small notebook, doing his best despite being busy trying to decipher an order at a full pastry shop. Zinnia Maquiel, the black-haired owner, called from behind the counter that Issei was too slow as she prepared orders for the bar and the ones the red dragon had already taken, which only increased his stress. The hero of the children was honoring his promise to help his kohai by acting as her lone assistant, a role that had seemed manageable at first but grew harder as more customers arrived. After an hour past the busiest point, Issei finally allowed himself to lean against the bar and rub his head, wondering why so many people would come to a pastry shop. Zinnia explained that she had been promoting the place since opening with events and special offers, pointing to a loft at one side of the shop. She added that tonight was karaoke night and singers received a 2-for-1 promotion on certain purchases. Issei understood then why so many people were singing off-key. Learning Zinnia's unusual menu names and racing to memorize orders had been stressful enough. The off-key singing amplified by the shop speakers had only increased his fatigue. Still, Issei had to admit Zinnia was right. With the crowd thinning as the night wore on, the atmosphere was pleasant. Everyone chatted with their companions and enjoyed the desserts, and both demons found themselves smiling in satisfaction. Issei conceded that it was a good place, remembering that she had been right since she had first let him try a muffin. After a few more busy minutes, Zinnia asked Issei to cover the orders and reached under the register for a case. Issei, joking and puzzled, asked what she planned to do. Zinnia replied that karaoke night wouldn't be any fun if the owner didn't participate. She sat on a modest wooden bench, took an acoustic guitar from its case, and positioned it on her lap while adjusting a microphone. The shop fell silent in anticipation. Zinnia began to play with calm, expressive hands and then sang. She performed with a soft, perfectly pitched voice that soothed like a lullaby. She sang lines including "I dig my hole, you build a wall. One day that wall is gonna fall," and the audience was captivated, applauding gently when she finished. Issei alone behind the bar felt a small ache at the base of his skull and shook his head to clear it, deciding it must be nothing more than fatigue. He helped himself to a drink from the fridge and listened, absorbed by the mood she created for the customers. When the song ended, Zinnia thanked everyone and invited them to return. As night fell, the last patrons left and both Issei and Zinnia exchanged triumphant smiles and a high five. Zinnia removed her apron, folded it, and began to settle the accounts. Issei sat on a stool and watched her, still surprised at how busy the evening had been. Zinnia handed him one of the special muffins and told him he had earned it. Issei accepted it gratefully. Zinnia then expressed her thanks for his help, noting that without him it would have been impossible to serve everyone with such short notice. She unlocked a small minibar under the counter and took out a bottle of classic liqueur, lifting it with pride. She told Issei she hoped he was good with strong drinks. Issei, half smiling and a little boastful, noted that as a demon and part dragon alcohol had long since stopped affecting him. Zinnia replied that this was no ordinary drink and that it was made with nothing less than a classic distilled spirit. Zinnia explained that a gallon of golden apple brew could fell even tannin. Issei reacted with surprise at finding such a drink in the human world and asked where she had gotten it. Zinnia replied that everyone knows who the saint was, but not how the miracles were done. She filled 2 glasses and offered the first to her idol, taking a cautious sip herself and making an exaggerated, cartoonish exhale of steam from her mouth. Issei, equally cautious, took his first sip and admitted the drink was very strong. He raised his glass and, with some enthusiasm, offered a toast. Zinnia answered his invitation by clinking her glass loudly against his. Time passed as they enjoyed their desserts and drinks and chatted amiably. The drink loosened them, and both began to blush and grow a little dreamy, though their light anecdotes kept the mood lively. Issei jokingly mentioned having taken care of an arm, even with a foolish ice dragon, and declared that no one would mess with someone he cared about. Noticing they had finished their desserts, Zinnia clumsily rose to the counter to grab 2 more muffins. The hero of children used the moment to let his mind revisit the previous night, and his mood darkened. Zinnia noticed and, with a tremulous smile, asked what had happened that day in a mild, reproachful tone. Issei hesitated, then asked if she had a boyfriend. Zinnia replied with a slightly mocking dismissiveness about men, saying she planned to enjoy her youth without being tied to anyone for now. Issei took another bite, then admitted that he had fought with Sona the night before. He confessed that he had lost his temper and said things he should not have, and then ran away like a coward. An awkward silence followed. He said he wanted to apologize but did not know how, and that their relationship had been distant lately despite Sona trying to give it time amid everything that had happened. He wanted to do something for her in return. Zinnia listened, a little embarrassed, and said she did not know exactly what to suggest but that arguments were normal in a long relationship. Issei acknowledged that they had argued before, but this time it had felt different. He had been truly angry when she had been asking for his support, and he wondered whether he was the man she deserved. Zinnia immediately dismissed his doubt, firmly telling him that he was a hero and a good man and that Sona was lucky to have his love and care. She insisted he should not undervalue his feelings, because that would also be an insult to what Sona felt for him. Zinnia clapped both palms on the counter with energy and, losing her balance, banged her face on the bar. She brushed it off and raised a thumb to show she was fine. Issei noticed a nosebleed, and Zinnia quickly fixed it with a piece of tissue. A couple of minutes later, they were seated again, elbows on the bench. Returning to the subject, Zinnia acknowledged that Issei felt bad about the argument but encouraged him not to be insecure. She told him that their love story was one of the most memorable in the underworld, comparable to legendary romances that had triumphed in the end, and suggested that a little time would help them reconcile. She tapped his back reassuringly and added that a bit of distance could refresh their ideas, that they would reconcile, care for each other, and show their affection. Issei replied weakly with thanks, forehead still resting on the wood. Zinnia then lowered her gaze, a little embarrassed, and mentioned that she had heard he was planning to propose to Sona. She suggested that they spend the next few days planning the best marriage proposal he could imagine. Issei grew cautious for a moment, surprised that anyone besides a few close friends knew about his secret. Zinnia sheepishly explained that she had learned about it when Sona had come in with Kiba and that she thought a little feminine help might be just what he needed. They fell silent for a few seconds while Zinnia nervously awaited his reaction. Issei finally asked what she suggested. Zinnia smiled broadly and, almost immediately, said that the first thing would be the engagement ring. She began to gesture as she looked around, then trailed off. While they searched, Issei and Zinnia, still tipsy, drifted away from the melancholy tone and continued musing about the perfect marriage proposal for the red dragon. Issei thought that might be what he needed to show Sona how much she mattered, telling her he was ready to spend the rest of his life with her. A massive bolt of magical and demonic energy struck the Seraphine squarely, sending him crashing through the mountains and burying the immediate threat beneath an enormous explosion. The blast forced Vala's comrades to shield their eyes from the shockwave. Kuroka scoffed under her breath, clearly tense, noting how powerful the foe had become. The battle had been going for hours, and the enemy's combination of physical and magical attacks was devastating. On top of that, his armor granted him an absurd level of defense and endurance. Only attacks of colossal power had a chance to matter. From the rubble, the silver-armored figure stepped out again, bearing only superficial wounds despite the group's massive attacks. The blond man's face remained serene even with visible cuts on his forehead, giving the impression the injuries were not severe. In an instant, the Seraphine teleported in front of Arthur Pendragon. Arthur reacted by crossing his two swords in an X to block. The Seraphine struck with a devastating punch that smashed against Arthur's holy blades and sent the swordsman flying like a projectile through the mountains before he crashed back to the ground. Lu Fei reacted with alarm and revulsion at the celestial being, preparing to strike back at whoever had hurt her brother. Armadiamante raised a massive spear of light and prepared to respond. Valis seized the moment to fragment some of the power of both the spear and the blond man, leaving the Seraphine vulnerable to the following electrical magic summoned by the descendant of Morgana. Biko growled in irritation, wondering what was happening with their opponent. Lucifer's descendant announced that the reductions were having an effect. He reported feeling like he absorbed much of the Seraphine's power, but that the Seraphine only seemed weakened for moments at a time. Again the Seraphine rose from the crater with barely more than a few bruises. Lynette and the others began to question how he remained unscathed despite everything they had unleashed. Their attention snapped toward Arthur when they saw him seriously wounded. Lu Fei rushed over to him. Arthur had been pierced in the thigh by Caliban, the sword passing cleanly through his leg and leaving him in considerable pain. He struggled to endure the agony and called for Valley. Albion spoke to Valley, surprised by the sudden call. Valley listened as Albion warned him that the Seraphine appeared to be manipulating the probabilities of the battle, twisting luck, coincidences, and critical hits to his own advantage. Albion suggested that perhaps not a single blow had truly landed on the Seraphine. Armadiamante lifted into the sky with 10 wings and spoke, confirming Albion's observation to the White Dragon Emperor. Vala's group reacted in shock. Kuroka asked whether the Seraphine could hear what Albion was telling Valley. Armadiamante explained that the Seraphine seemed to possess an item that allowed such a connection. Valley realized the enemy was wielding Thello's karma and warned his friends that the angel already had other Longinus outside the Regulus Nemia. The Seraphine allowed himself a smug smile and admitted he had prepared for this fight with a weapon designed to defeat such an opponent. He questioned how a sacred gear that manipulated luck could be enough to defeat him, but then hinted that combined with another relic it might be dangerous. With that, a powerful lightning bolt struck before the celestial being, and when it cleared, a silver-bladed sword lay in front of him. The weapon had a dark blue hilt and a golden pommel from which 2 strands of golden cord hung. The Seraphine named it Itos, sword of the divine goddess. The blade radiated a potent sacred energy that quickly spread through the area and affected the sacred gears within its range, including Thello's karma. Lint muttered under his breath as the situation grew worse. The Celestial had now drawn a holy sword and activated a balance breaker for a sacred gear that had been distorting reality around them. Kuroka, Valley, Biko, and Lint assumed defensive positions and fell back, while Lu Fei tended to her wounded brother. To everyone's surprise, the blonde simply raised his sword and pointed it skyward. At that moment, Valley found himself completely frozen. Everyone realized they were in immediate danger. Valley stared in disbelief as his body refused to obey him. A surge of force compelled his left arm upward toward the heavens. Biko lunged for the Seraphine, ready to strike his skull, but the air itself seemed to resist any direct attack as the enemy's control over probability and circumstance tightened around the battlefield. Diamond Weapon struck cleanly with his staff, but the blow met a barrier of light that prevented any outside force from reaching the blonde. Diamond Weapon spoke ominously that he would not be the one to punish Vale. His own sins would. After those words, lights began to emerge from the body of Lucifer's descendant. They shot into the sky and then fell behind Diamond Weapon, forming human shapes despite their ethereal transparency. Lu Fei watched and asked what was happening as more and more of those spirits poured from Vale's body, an overwhelming number that seemed to fill the sky behind the seraphim. Everyone was astonished, but Vale was consumed by confusion, not because he did not understand the phenomenon but because of the clothing and faces of many of the apparitions, which regarded him with contempt and, in some cases, disappointment. Diamond Weapon identified them to Vale. The silver-haired Vale answered yes, bracing for the worst, and admitted that they were all the people he had killed in his life. He recognized several faces: demons, humans, mages, many from his first confrontation with Hyodo Issei and others from crimes in his past that filled him with shame. Vale had finished expelling the spirits and could move again. Diamond Weapon told him to look closely at those faces, the lives he had extinguished through his ambition and thirst for power, because they would be the ones to bring about his ruin and the ruin of all he held dear. The platinum-haired Seraphine immediately took a defensive stance. He felt no guilt for the people he had killed in the past, but the weight of the contemptuous, disappointed stares made thick beads of sweat run down the back of his neck beneath his armor. The weapons declared that they would punish all monsters like him, creatures who had existed only to destroy and hurt on a whim and under a sad illusion of power, and that it was fitting for his victims to end his miserable existence. After that proclamation, the ghosts transformed into spheres of energy and shot toward the sword in Seraphine's hand, beginning to merge with it and bathing it in a sacred glow that grew stronger with each spirit joining the ritual. The massive power being gathered made the area tremble, soon escalating into a quake that shook the stones of the already ruined battlefield and disrupted the fragile balance of the weather. Arthur realized they were in serious trouble as he felt the sword's power could wipe the entire place away. Kuroka shouted in terror that they had to leave, insisting the energy now contained was too great even for Vale to divide. Despite his reluctance, the white-armored demon stepped forward and spread his wings powerfully. The white-armored demon confronted Seraphine, calling him a sad being who had taken the name Weapon Diamond yet could not speak his true name on the battlefield, and challenged whether someone like him could dare to judge the demon. Ridiculous, the rebel mocked, as if Vale were expected to regret anything. Tensing his being, Vale activated Empiero Juggernaut Overdrive. His armor shifted dramatically, the white plating morphing into gleaming silver while blue gems flared with light. The sacred sword's colossal power still dwarfed the surge he had gathered, but the pressure in the air grew oppressive enough that the other fighters on the battlefield, aware that Vale would not hold back, stepped back to let him unleash everything he had. Vale pushed further, pushing past his limits until his form resonated with a roar that echoed across the field. The armor took on an organic look, and parts darkened under the lingering influence of Ophis and the demonic blood of Lucifer. Without the ancient goddess present, Vale knew the transformation could not last long. Still, he spread the 12 demonic wings his final form allowed and prepared for the opponent from the rebel group, who smiled with self-satisfaction at seeing how close the descendant of the original demon had come to his peak. The silver demon extended both hands and all his wings, ready to receive the onslaught. He taunted the rebel, insisting that a few lowly foes would not make him repent. The rebel, a warrior known as the Diamond Armament, accepted the challenge and swung his sword with all his might. A colossal sphere of pale blue power formed around the blade and moved forward, consuming everything in its path. The sphere, more than 50 meters across, turned rocky outcrops into dust before it. Vale answered with everything he had. He unleashed Satan Compression Divider, a beam of black, silver, and white energy from his hands that collided with the sacred sphere. The impact sent rocks flying for kilometers in an explosion of force. Though Vale's beam was thinner, it managed to slow the sphere's advance for a few seconds. Vale's gaze narrowed as the sacred sphere steadily gained ground, its overwhelming power inching toward him. He understood the danger. The sphere did not draw only on his adversary's energy but, through the sacred gear and that sword, on the power of the souls whose lives the wielder had once ended. The amount being channeled was enormous. In the distance, the sphere erased the landscape as it rolled forward. Vala poured in more power, but the battle raged like a titanic, stylized clash, with bright blasts and sweeping wings rather than any brutal detail. It was past midnight. The bustle Zinnia's cafe had seen earlier was gone, replaced by quiet and the soft snores of Hyodo Issei, who lay asleep on one of the double couches with a blanket Zinnia had offered after their talk, given his alcohol-soaked state. Issei had insisted he did not want to trouble her and would sleep on the sofa. Zinnia did not mind offering her bed. She sat on a bar stool and watched the Red Dragon Emperor asleep, a small, satisfied smile on her face as she waved a lock of hair and took out her phone. Zinnia dialed a number and waited. The line answered, but the voice on the other end remained silent for a moment, as was its habit. She noted the delay and suspected Issei's altered physiology was to blame. Camula, the voice on the line, explained that Issei's body had been converted into a demon and modified by the Great Red, making his composition difficult to manipulate. Zinnia responded coldly and distant, telling Camula that she expected the other party to remember the consequences of failing to uphold their end of the bargain. Camula assured her he would not fail and that he would provide more of the substance called replay the next day. Zinnia ordered a more concentrated dose without hesitation. Camula warned that a stronger dose could leave Issei in a vegetative state, that the smallest variation might destroy his limbic system and reduce him to nothing but an empty body. Zinnia disregarded the warning, insisting the concentration be increased. She believed Hyodo Issei, the great hero of the underworld and the Red Dragon Emperor with his hybrid dragon-demon body, could handle a stronger dose. Her usually serene and almost childlike expression twisted into a narrow-eyed look accompanied by a malicious smile as she said she did not want to waste any more time. Camula cautioned that rushing would be dangerous and reminded her that the objective would be achieved if they blocked the neural connection between the Dragon Gales and Hyodo Issei. An abrupt increase would alert him to what was happening. Zinnia blinked, aware that the creature inside Issei might warn him or even seize control to protect him. There was a pause before the call continued. The voice on the phone asked about the connection to the Welsh dragon. The voice on the other end replied that with continuous doses the connection would be completely severed in a week, and that a steady supply would allow full control of Hyodo Issei in the same time frame. The black-haired woman's gaze narrowed and her smile lengthened. Zinnia chimed musically and tapped the bar with the pads of her fingers, saying that sounded perfect. The caller answered that they were glad to hear it. Without further farewells, Zinnia ended the call, shaking her head dramatically and sweeping some hair from her forehead to look with full attention at her sleeping guest. She noted, teasingly, that they had a wedding to plan these days and rose from her bench to walk toward him. As she approached, she found the situation curious. Although he had been drunk, the first thing he had done after they stopped drinking was offer to help her clean up and then to take a short rest while she finished closing the place. Zinnia observed that he was certainly a gentleman and that it was no wonder women were drawn to him. She admitted to herself that she found him somewhat interesting. Then she mused that perhaps it was his aura as the Red Emperor Dragon that unconsciously attracted others, because outside of that, she did not consider him particularly compelling. She took a seat on the armchair opposite his, legs crossed, a half-eaten muffin in one hand. She guessed he hated being special, and she continued, thinking aloud about how being valued only for the creature inside you had been his burden from the start. Without that, she told herself, he would be nobody, just another person in a noisy world who would make no difference. Memories surfaced, her mother's delusions that Zinnia's blood belonged to a superior being and that she was destined to rule the world. Those proclamations had always felt like madness to Zinnia. She found the idea of being inherently superior boring. She had once been told she was meant to be the absolute leader of the underworld, but that prospect had never appealed. She preferred studying and learning about everything the world had to offer, and such grandiose fantasies still struck her as tiresome. Looking at him with thinly veiled contempt, she admitted she felt nothing but disgust for others like Rias Gremory, Sarug Bale, and Sona Citri, people who, in her view, had not truly fought for anything yet believed they had the right to rule. Their arrogance repulsed her and, by doing so, had awakened a genuine desire for power within. Now she wanted that power. A playful smile crossed her face as she stood and moved to the sofa where Issei rested. She cupped his head in both hands and pressed a brief, gentle kiss to his forehead. It was curious, she thought, that despite her disdain she would end up carrying out the things her mother had wanted. She intended to take everything from Sona Citri, and she would start with him.